Chapter 836. 10 minutes later, Huaisher squatted next to the burning base and finally figured out what had happened. It exploded. He couldn't believe it. Yes, the base master looked miserable. It exploded. What about your restaurant? Huaisher asked anxiously. The famous restaurant that makes flying pancakes on the moon? It's gone. The base master's expression became more and more sorrowful. The chef is dead. Huaisher was angry. Is there something wrong with your lousy tour group? Kepler Base was gone before they even saw it. Such a big base with the 10 famous restaurants on the moon blew up just like that? Wasn't there nothing wrong when they came? Weren't the space shuttle and Mitra space station fine? Why did it change as soon as they entered the orbit of the moon? Sitting in the airborne capsule, they ran into a meteor shower. It wasn't easy to make it in time for landing, but Kepler Base was gone. More importantly, how was he going to explain it to the dog? How was he going to explain it to the dog? Sorry, the restaurant is gone? The flying pancakes are gone? Did you pull the sleigh in vain? I think you don't want to live anymore. Huaisher covered her face with her mask as she felt the pain of her future. The dog beside the sled was already impatient from waiting for the flying biscuits the Huaisher had promised. It was grinding its teeth against the frame of the sled. In the vacuum, there was no sound of grinding, only sparks could be seen flying. It illuminated the bodies piled up behind the sleigh. It was extremely horrifying. This was the gift Santa Claus brought. The bodies of the attackers they encountered on the way. Unfortunately, every face frozen in the extreme cold was exactly the same, without any difference. After the alchemists finished their inspection, they all fell silent. All of them were artificial humans, and they were the most common version, the most common type of production method, and there was no clue to trace them at all. And on Huaisher's shoulder, the unnoticed crow's phantom looked at everyone's appearance and gradually showed a meaningful smile. Aha, it's getting interesting. Tongi laughed softly. This curse is too innovative, so that's how it is. Curse? Huaisher asked. That's right. Don't you understand, idiot? Tongi said, everyone here, or to be exact, everyone who went to the Helios workshop has been cursed. Huaisher was stunned for a moment and frowned, sensing that something was wrong. Logically speaking, he should be very sensitive to such things as a negative energy rocket. Moreover, every curse that fell on him would basically be repelled by his divinity, and he even had an additional destruction elemental derivative in his body. While it was inauspicious, it could be said that his life was getting tougher, and what horoscope could counter him? Moreover, don't forget about the Book of Destiny. Have you ever heard of the tenfold rebound? Those who did so would only die a horrible death. Also, why hadn't he noticed anything? It's very simple, Huaisher. The curse is just its form and result. It's simply ingenious. Haha. No, it should be said that in order to achieve the means, it doesn't care about the purpose. In the end, it uses anti-aircraft guns to kill mosquitoes, right? Tongi understood it all after observing all the alchemists, because the main body of its effect was not a single individual. Instead, it was everything they saw. To put it simply, it was the entire surface of a moon, all the way up to the orbital layer. Someone had secretly set up a secret apparatus so large that it could cover the entire moon. Everyone who entered it. No, to avoid triggering more symptoms if the scope was too large, and to conserve power, the host of the secret apparatus had narrowed the targeted area. It was just targeted at all alchemists. Everyone who held the beacon of the Helios workshop. Due to the sheer size of the arcanum, the power distributed to every part of the arcanum grew thinner. Moreover, separated by a thick spacesuit, every alchemist did not notice the tiny signs that wrapped around them. None of them noticed the malice the moon had towards them. That was why Tongi lamented that it was like using anti-aircraft guns to kill mosquitoes. If the mountain doesn't come, I'll go. If there's no way to make the sun revolve around the earth, wouldn't it be the same if the earth revolves around the sun? Instead of having people step into the pit was moved to their feet. With such mastery and ability, it was almost possible to affect the moon's operation, while it merely pushed the environment to the opposite side of everyone. Instead of dealing with fate itself, it subtly manipulated probability to shift everything to the side of misfortune. It was as if a miracle had been turned into a calamity. Every stroke of luck would be turned into an equal amount of misfortune before it happened, and an equal amount of misfortune would stack with an equal amount of misfortune. Nothing good would happen, and accidents would happen frequently. It was not as simple as spending a few $1,000s to draw a 5-star character from a card pool. In this airless vacuum, on the surface of the moon that was filled with terrible cold, there was only death if any accident happened. But with such an ability, sending those androids to attack the alchemists was a little too superfluous. It was really puzzling. But now, although it was a little late, everyone had finally noticed the malice. Who was the one who created such a strange disaster? The moment he understood, Ragnar seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly raised his one eye and looked coldly at Rachel. Behind the helmet, Rachel's expression could not help but twitch. Why are you looking at me? Because I have a question for you, Rachel. Ragnar took a step forward and asked, "Where did you go before you came to Kepler Base?" Rachel was taken aback, and then immediately became angry. I didn't go anywhere. Why are you asking this? Didn't go anywhere, huh? I took the Egyptian space station to the moon's central hub at the same time as you. But why did you come a day later than me? Ragnar pressed on step by step, looking down at the old friend in front of him through the mask. Where did you go? I didn't go anywhere. I was stuck in a traffic jam. Rachel retorted with his eyes wide open. Why should I tell you where I went? Huh. I can guess even if you don't tell me. Just half an hour before you arrived, something suddenly happened in the dark side prison. Do you think there's something to do with it? Ragnar sneered, a cold light shooting out his one eye. His palm pressed against his waist, ready to strike. Don't try to quibble, Rachel. The alchemy array of the dark side prison was made by our workshop, and I can see the residual disaster stain on you at a glance. You must have been in the dark side prison recently. Rachel's voice became sharp. It has nothing to do with you. Then why are you lying? Ragnar raised his voice and asked sternly, What are you hiding with this secretive attitude? He paused and asked word by word, What does the death of Grandmaster Publius have to do with you? As soon as he said this, everyone froze in place. They looked at each other. Publius Augustus, the Grandmaster who rose to prominence 80 years ago, the silver staff wielder, the man of fission, the wanderer, the explorer of the seventh creation, an existence who stood at the peak of source materials. He actually died so abruptly? It was unbelievable. Even Rachel stiffened. He stared blankly at the person in front of him. He couldn't believe his words. He's dead? He staggered back a step and immediately screamed crazily. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me. He was just accompanying me, Ragnar. An old voice sounded. It was Galander. The old man calmly explained. As an apothecary under the orders of the Stone Cauldron Society, Mr. Rachel accompanied me to check on Publius's physical condition before we set off. This was a secret mission, and he was forbidden to speak of it to anyone. Are you satisfied with this answer? Ragnar fell into silence. It was as if he couldn't understand why another Grandmaster would be involved in Publius's death. He thought darkly, perhaps Publius's death was Galander's doing? Or perhaps the Stone Cauldron Society was happy to see this happen. When he thought of Publius's numerous unique technologies and patents, everything seemed to be explainable, but the water behind this was a bit too deep. What he had originally thought to be a deep pool had turned into a pitch-black and tyrannical ocean, and he no longer dared to look into it. And Galander didn't doubt how Ragnar knew about Publius's death. After all, the base of the alchemy array of the Shadow Side prison was made and maintained by the workshop he was in, the Silver Steel. Such a big thing had happened, and he was on the moon. Logically and emotionally, his senior apprentice brother would have informed him as soon as possible. I know what you want to ask, Ragnar, and I can answer you. Although I don't know the origin of this curse, I can conclude that it has nothing to do with Publius's death. Galandian then revealed another great secret. Oh my God! Although his Alzheimer's was most likely a disguise, as early as 15 years ago, Publius's soul had already begun to gradually wither, and his source substance had decayed. All that was left was a skeleton. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died so tragically in the process of breaking out of prison. Amidst everyone's silence, Galander finally said, The current state of his death is still sealed. Before the results of the investigation are out, we can't announce it to the public, and I hope you won't spread it." Ragnar bowed his head and didn't speak again. On the side, Huai, who had dug out the kitchen refrigerator from the ruins with great difficulty and was feeding the dog vacuum pancakes, raised his head in confusion. He felt that he had missed an earth-shattering melon. "What are you talking about?" Just like that, 10 minutes later, the chicken finally finished the rice, the fire burned through the lock, and the dog finished the pancakes after many twists and turns. At the predetermined time, place and alchemists were finally about to embark on the final journey toward their final destination, the Helios workshop. When the search and rescue team cleaned up the ruins of the base and found Ragnar's body, it was already 6 hours later. Chapter 837. On the moon's surface, at the entrance of the Kepler Valley, the landing zone, Huai tugged on the leash and looked around curiously with Broken Dog, not knowing where the flight they had booked was. Then a silent disciple behind Garland Dion stepped forward and took out a long white bone horn from his chest. Then, under the protection of Garland Dion, the disciple lifted his mask and, without panting, bit the mouthpiece, puffed up his cheeks, and blew with all his might. What was this? A cosmic concert? Huai was dumbfounded, but then he heard a mighty roar echo in the vacuum. It was not a frequency that could be heard by the human ear. Only with the support of Supreme could one feel the distant echo like a whale's song. It was transmitted in the vacuum. It blew into the distance. Then, above the moon's orbit, a huge shadow slowly descended. Under the illumination of the landing zone's lights, a black dot quickly enlarged, and finally, a huge body appeared. Its long tail rolled up waves of source matter, and waves of blue light appeared like water waves, illuminating its appearance. Its signature huge head and slender body, and even its exaggerated size that was comparable to a warship, made Huai want to scratch his head. That was a sperm whale. A sperm whale that was alive and kicking in space, swimming in the vacuum. No way was it so magical. He completely forgot that he was holding an even more magical thing in his hand, and the thing in his hand was staring straight at the sperm whale, and it was already licking its lips eagerly. It was a thing that had not been touched yet. Was it delicious? "Friend, is this your first time seeing it?" Next to Huai, a figure came up and privately chatted with Huai in the channel. "That's an alchemy creature modified by the Fu Institute, created with the offspring of Leviathan, and finally got a living border relic. It's like the biochemical beast in America, but much more convenient. Oh, your dog is so cute. Can I pet it?" Broken Dog turned around and coldly glanced at the eager man, baring its teeth. "Haha, it's that character." The newcomer waved his hand indifferently and took a step back. Through his mask, Huai could see the cigar still burning behind it. Other than in the game, it was the first time he saw a smoker who could light a cigarette in a spacesuit. Hello, what's your name?" Huai stretched out his hand. The man smoking the cigar shook his hand and shook it twice. "American alchemist, Izzy Yaddle. Actually, the full name is longer than that, but you can call me Izzy." He looked to be about the same age as Huai. With a smile, he did not seem to be cold and rejected by others, with vitality and kindness that other alchemists did not. Huai from the ivory tower. Before Huai could finish her self-introduction, Izzy nodded in understanding. "Classical music classroom? I know. You're quite famous in the Ivy League." Is it?" "Yes." Izzy nodded and sighed. "To be honest, I didn't expect that my niece, with her arrogant character, could make friends. It's really surprising." Huai expression twitched, and he suddenly felt that something was not right. "Wait, niece? Who is it?" Liz Hetmock. Didn't she tell you about me?" Izzy looked at him curiously. "Maybe it's because I'm an uncle who idles around every day, and it's embarrassing in the family." Huai was silent for a long time. He moved a little to the side, and then moved a little more, guarding against this guy who would pull out his sword and attack him. This wave, it was the parents who bullied a child coming to find him. Who would have thought that this guy, who looked so young, was actually an uncle? Ha! Don't worry, although it's a family. In fact, there is no similar bloodline just obeying tradition. Izzy took a big puff of the cigar, and his smile became more and more cheerful in the smoke. He patted Huaishi's back. Just think of me as a tourist. Izzy shrugged. I'm a white sublimator, I don't even have a stigmata, and I know nothing about alchemy. I'm just here to greet an old friend on behalf of an elder in the family. If something happens, remember to help me out for Liz's sake. Huaishi did not speak. He showed a kind of smiling awkwardness without losing his politeness. As for Izzy's self-introduction and purpose, he did not believe a single punctuation mark. Izzy seemed to be aware of his vigilance, but he did not care and was still as enthusiastic as before. He moved to Huaishi's side and began to introduce his classmates loudly to the freshman like a blonde character in a cartoon. The one-eyed one is called Ragnar, an alchemist from the Silver Monument, a little arrogant and bad-tempered. The one behind him is an alchemist from the Russian Federation, Valery. He's good at metallurgy, but he's more like a sublimator than an alchemist, which seems to be very similar to you. But he seems to be harder to deal with than Ragnar, haha. As for the one behind Galandon, it's the pharmacist Rachel. That old lady Yima is an alchemist from the Egyptian royal family. As for those few who are autistic, they are all Galandon students. They have sworn an oath of silence, and except for the necessary communication when participating in the secret ceremony, they will not speak at all. Huaishi was dizzy from listening to the names of the dishes, and he did not remember any of them at all. Anyway, to summarize the central idea, everyone was difficult to get along with, ostracized foreigners, and looked down on you for having a lower level of education. But it didn't matter if you felt bored and wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk. Don't forget to look for me. He had been taken advantage of for nothing. By the time he finished speaking, they were already on the boat. After passing through the mouth of the sperm whale that was like a gate, the space behind was unexpectedly spacious. There was a conference room, a lounge, and even a single room for each person. Of course, the most important thing was the well-equipped alchemy workshop of the whole realm. Every item belonged to the kind that had been on Huaishi's shopping list for hundreds of years, and could only be taken out to take a look at during the holidays, and did not dare to click the buy button at all. In the past, Huaishi would have taken the risk to buy one out of desperation. Fortunately, times had changed. Now that there was something from the ivory tower that could be bought for free at any time, Huaishi had a lot more confidence for no reason, and he could even lift his pants and say, "Here it is." After the rooms were prepared for everyone, the lifelike puppets that looked like ordinary people returned to their jobs on their own. The son of Leviathan, who looked like a sperm whale, swayed its long tail in the silent whale song and swam into deeper and darker space. Huaishi led the dog and stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling window in the corridor, and suddenly felt the benefits of the fantasy style. Countless stars flew past in front of his eyes, and he did not even feel the slightest tremor, and even the gravity was normal. There were green plants on both sides, and there were even chairs and round tables in the corners for guests to rest at any time. Unlike the miserable life in other space stations, the supplies and services here were so generous that it made people cry. Ringing the bell could call for 24-hour service, and there were even massages and spas. It was a fantasy. Was this alchemy? Love. After leaving the moon, it could be seen that everyone's complexion was much better. At the very least, they were far away from the entanglement of misfortune and misfortune, ensuring their own safety. Only Huaishi was still cautious, and he even stuffed his spacesuit in his saddlebag, ready to run at any time. Sitting in the airdrop cabin exploded. Going to Kepler, the base exploded. He was afraid that the ship would also explode. The world was getting more and more outrageous these days, and even people dared to break out of the dark side prison. So he had to be on guard. What if, right? Now, in front of the window, Huaishi stared at the twinkling stars, and gradually, he became fascinated, until the Phantom of Crow appeared on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" Tangi asked. "Why are you so engrossed? How should I put it? It feels strange that there is such a sci-fi thing like space in such a fantasy world." Huaishi pinched his chin and sighed with confusion. There is a subtle feeling of crosstalk. You see, sitting in the fantasy realm and coinciding with sci-fi, isn't this a bit inappropriate? Isn't this very normal? Tangi calmly waved her little wings with a look of nonchalance. Isn't science originally something to replace magic? It's not strange. It's better to say that this is normal. Otherwise, what do you think the present realm is? Huaisher thought for a long time and asked tentatively, a big ball in a glass cover. Isn't that the definition of Earth? Tangi said, in the end, the present realm is the aggregation of matter. Other than being able to bask in the sun, it's no different from hell. No, that's not what I mean. Huaisher shook his head and explained, before I became an ascendant, I always believed in the infinite sea of stars and the existence of aliens. Tangi looked at him doubtfully. You can believe it now? Do you think it's all a lie? Huh, isn't it? Huaisher was dumbfounded. Didn't they say that the sun is essentially the manifestation of the pillar of God's essence? So many stars are just the projection of destiny. Besides, aren't there no living creatures in outer space? That depends on how you interpret it. Tangi thought for a moment and told him, in essence, everything in the present realm, including Earth and space, as well as so many stars in infinite space, is just a way of manifestation, a result of expression. A world explained by laws and science has been deeply ingrained day after day since hundreds of years ago and is unshakable. But this does not contradict the common sense that ascendants know. Huaisher shook his head. But in such a world, where is hell, Tangi? In such a world, does it really need something as illusory as hell? Huh, that's a good question. She laughed, raised her wings, and leaned against Huaisher's neck, and suddenly asked, speaking of which, what do you think of the existence of the depth, Huaisher? Where do you think the physical body of hell is in the present realm? How do you explain the spatial relationship between hell and hell? Huaisher was stunned. He was speechless. Tongji continued to ask, don't tell me that you're right in front of me. Isn't this cold vacuum hell for humans? Aren't astronauts and ascendants very similar to Earth? Are abyssal creatures different from aliens in the eyes of humans? Huaisher was silent for a long time and instinctively shook his head. You're confusing the concept. You know, it's not the same thing at all. Their depth did not change at all. Huaisher also could not feel the existence of the abyss sediment. This was indeed the present realm. But Tangi's words made him fall into deep thought, because the world in front of him was also a hell that humans could not survive in. And, are you beginning to understand, Huaisher? Tangi laughed softly, as if she was lamenting, the world has always been the world. Huaisher, it has just been redefined. In modern terms, it should be the observer effect, right? In ancient times, the world of humans was so simple. As long as the round sky and the square earth were enough to satisfy them. At worst, they could add an elephant to hold it up. If they felt that they couldn't hold it up, they could put a giant turtle. If the sky was going to collapse, they could cut off a few turtles' feet to prop it up. If there was a flood, then it must be the anger of the gods to build a boat to float. She said, at that time, the existence of the gods was the wall of the present realm. They were derived from the pillars, existed in accordance with the will of heaven, followed the wishes of humans, interpreted the world, and isolated the invasion of hell. But the era of the gods had passed, and they were all dead. The era of humans had arrived. Unlike the past, magic had disappeared, gods had died, humans had redefined everything, and the world had changed. However, the essence had not changed at all. What had changed was only the angle of observation. So there was a law, a framework, the existence of the three major blockades in science, and this endless space that had never been there in the past. But the existence of everything would not be without reason. Indeed, the brilliance of the stars is a symbol of the operation of the will of heaven. But if you trace its origin, there must be a source. Even if there's nothing in the dark outer space, and the so-called stars are just lifeless aggregations of matter, they still have an irreplaceable meaning. The so-called space is originally the manifestation of the endless hell in the present realm. Tangi stared at the countless stars and told him, at the end of the billions of stars, where the cold brilliance comes from, is hell itself. The so-called abyss and the so-called space had never been different to humans. They were both distant and mysterious places, full of danger and taboos. In the dark space, those sparkling things, those fleeting phantoms, those were all projections from hell in the distant depths. Separated by a long depth, their power attracted the convergence of matter, forming barren skeletons, declaring their existence. In the end, under the power of the law called gravity, the resplendent sea above this depth was formed. Look, why sure, the fire of the sun has disappeared. In the reflection of the glass, between the countless jumping lights, the magnificent phantom held his shoulder, lowered her head, and whispered in his ear, "Now, we are sailing above the abyss." Chapter 838. After spending half a day, Huaisher finally understood the changes after the end of the Age of Gods. When scholars replaced magic with science composed of countless laws, and the three major blockades transformed the entire realm, space emerged spontaneously. As a symbol of the abyss in the present realm, countless hells under the depths reflected the stars. This was a necessary link for the world to be able to operate in a harmonious and self-consistent manner. Of course, in the present realm above the depths, all you can see is a pile of barren stones. All changes in the depths must be achieved by the rules of the present realm. Only the present realm is the most convenient entrance to hell, so you don't have to worry about a hell entrance suddenly appearing in front of you. Tangi said, "The only exception is the moon." Huaisher was puzzled. The sun and the moon have been the most important concepts of every civilization in every era since ancient times. Huaisher. Tangi continued to explain. The sun is the embodiment of the pillar of the spirit, and the moon is actually inextricably linked to the present realm. As a blank star, it is regarded as the safety bolt of the entire present realm. It helps the present realm to share the pressure from the abyss all the time. Once the deep erosion exceeds the critical point, part of the pressure will be discharged to the moon first. It's like a flood relief area under a flood. At the same time, it is also the shield of the present realm, resisting most of the changes caused by the operation of the abyss in space. It sounded so miserable. It was simply a tool star. Huaisher pitted it when he heard it. It was used as a utility room and a wall, suffered for no reason, and was bombarded by meteorites every now and then. It could only be said that planets and planets were not the same. In addition, even a god's creation like Helios, who has the dual attributes of the present realm and hell, can't enter the depths of hell and space. It can only descend power in the form of a projection. Tangi sighed, appearing once every 70 years, and then being autistic for 70 years. TSK. There must be something wrong with the brain. That's why orphan players are so pitiful. Huaisher seemed to detect a well-concealed mockery and malice from the teasing tone. But when he looked back, she returned to the appearance of a crow and looked at him innocently. "Forget it. Give me some face and pretend that nothing happened." Huaisher withdrew his gaze. Just like that, a day passed quickly. When Huaisher went to the dining hall for dinner, he found that there was only Izzy and himself in the large dining hall. "Where are the others?" Huaisher sat on the chair and asked curiously. They all went to their rooms. So, alchemists are a bit too reclusive. Izzy smoked a cigar and took one out of her pocket. "Do you want one?" "Forget it. I tried it once and I choked." Huaisher lowered his head and glanced at the menu before turning to the puppet beside him. "Give me a bowl of ramen and raw meat for my dog. Thank you. Don't you want to try foie gras with caviar?" Izzy wiped the corner of her mouth and took a sip of red wine. "The caviar here is very authentic and has a unique flavor." "Ah, I forgot that you're the hell cooking demon. Showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. Is that what you Dongxiao people say?" Okay. Your Dongxiao language is already very standard." Huaisher's head hurt a little. He felt that Izzy's image was beginning to overlap with the Doomsday language in some divine TV series. "Don't be so cold, Mr. Huaisher. We still have a long time to spend together." Izzy put down the cigar and spread her hands. "I like to make friends with you." No. I'm already under a lot of pressure to have your niece as a friend. Huaishi's scalp was a little numb. To be honest, in this damn alchemy tour group, the one who made him the most uneasy now was not Garland Eon, but this seemingly young old ghost in front of him. The others came here for their own reasons, but he didn't understand why Izzy, a non-alchemist and a blank sublimator, came here. After all, it was outrageous that an inheritor of noble blood from America was still a blank sublimator until now. She didn't have any stigmata, as if she was really here for a vacation, smoking, drinking, and eating caviar. She wanted to make friends with Huaishi. But why? We don't match. Domble Corporation didn't have any business dealings with America, and the relationship between the Ivory Tower and the Ivy League was even more complicated. Huaishi could understand why Izzy rejected him like the others. However, this sudden kindness left him a little confused. What was she after? "This is the fun of traveling, Mr. Huaishi," Izzy said with a grin. "You don't know what will happen, and you don't know what kind of people you will meet. So you have to cherish every moment and every partner you meet. If you ask me, there's nothing wrong with maintaining a cautious attitude like you, but you will miss a lot of fun. If you like traveling so much, I'll introduce a friend who loves traveling to you someday," Huaishi suggested sincerely. "I believe you will have a common language with him. Well, as long as you don't dislike him for always wearing a gray suit and looking like an overworked worker." Izzy smiled and didn't say anything else. She just looked at the way Huaishi and his dog ate, and even added a seafood set for the dog. Then she found that the dog didn't appreciate it. It didn't even wag its tail twice. It directly opened its mouth and swallowed the plate and gnawed 2 holes in the floor. "Is this also your work? It's amazing." Izzy sighed. "Can I borrow it to breed?" The dog's eyes suddenly became dangerous. Izzy chuckled and waved her hands. She was actually apologizing to a dog. Then she offered a whole barbecue platter as an apology. "To be honest, I really don't see the need for you to go to Helios." Huaishi sighed and asked in confusion, "If you want to talk about alchemists, there are many in America, right? The legendary workshop. I remember that the 4-leaf clover is in America, right?" "It's not the same, Huaishi." Izzy shook her head and smiled cheerfully. "That's the oldest alchemy workshop, a miracle creation that can almost be traced back to the prehistoric chaos era. It's a legend of legends that contains the technology of the gods era. If I don't go there when I have the chance, it'll be a regret in my life. Besides, don't I still have a mission? Mission? To chat with an old friend on behalf of her parents? I'll be damned if I believe you." Huaishi shook his head, bowed his head, and finished his noodles and politely said goodbye. Izzy still sat in the same place, enjoying her dinner. When the elevator door opened, Huaishi's movements paused for a moment. He didn't expect there to be people inside. It was the one-eyed alchemist named Ragnar and another man named Rachel. The two seemed to be arguing in a low voice, and the impatient Ragnar had already pulled Rachel's collar. At the elevator entrance, Huaishi coughed in a low voice. He paused and looked at Dumu coldly. Huaishi and the dog also looked over curiously. "Good evening, both of you," Huaishi said. "Do you mind letting me use the elevator?" In the long silence, Ragnar slowly let go of his hand and patted Rachel's collar. Rachel ran out of the elevator like he was escaping, not even saying thank you. Ragnar gave Huaishi a mocking look. "If I were you, I wouldn't meddle in other people's business, Huaishi." "Mister, I'm used to it." Huaishi shrugged, raised his hand, and pressed the up button to stop the elevator from closing. Ragnar snorted and walked straight out, trying to knock away Huaishi, who was blocking the way. But Huaishi was still smiling, and even the dog behind him stuck out his tongue happily, full of expectation. He seemed to have noticed something. Ragnar's movements paused for a moment, and his expression became gloomier. He turned sideways in humiliation and brushed past Huaishi. Behind him, as the elevator door slowly closed, he suddenly turned back and glanced coldly into the elevator. The eye of truth lit up with a sharp light, brewing some kind of malice and curse. But then, everything seemed to have changed. At Huaishi's feet, the overly lively wolf dog suddenly tilted its head and looked over. Grin, simple and honest smile. But under the gaze of the eye of truth, the funny smile rapidly expanded, multiplied, and changed shape. After tearing apart the original camouflage, it turned into an amorphous, ferocious outline. A wriggling gloom, like a crack leading to the abyss, it outlined the terrifying reflection of a predator. The indescribably ferocious essence of the abyss wrapped around its two pairs of asymmetrical and strange eyes, and endless darkness gushed out from them. It was as if the incarnation of the abyss had descended here, wanting to tear everything in front of it apart and greedily devour all the starlight into its belly. The startling reflection made Ragnar freeze in place in disbelief. But when he subconsciously looked at Huai, the elevator door was about to close, and he couldn't see his face clearly. At that moment, he just felt a sharp pain, from anxiety and pain in his eyes. Light. It was as if there was endless light gushing out from between the closed iron doors, spreading violently and solemnly, covering everything in it, burning everything to nothing. Pa! A crisp sound burst out of the silence. Blood-colored tears seeped out from the corners of his eyes. A terrible crack spread out from this incomparably precious eye. In the dead silence, Ragnar froze in place as if he had turned into a stone statue. After a long, long time, the man raised his finger, pierced his eye socket, and took off the eyeball. Without pity, he crushed the eyeball to pieces. His 5 fingers clenched. Then, a faint light came through, and when his 5 fingers unfolded again, an intact and magnificent eye had appeared in his hand. It returned to his eye socket. Ragnar turned and walked to the restaurant, as if nothing had happened. That night, late at night, Huai, who was tossing and turning, had a strange dream. In a trance, he seemed to have turned into stone, into running water, and into the wind, shuttling through the barren land and the world. He vaguely caught a glimpse of a lonely figure on a horse. The middle-aged man with stubble on his face was so haggard and his eyes were empty. He wandered through the world like a beggar, bending down and speaking to all the living things he encountered. To birds, snakes, insects, flowers, dragons in the sky, elves in the water, and demons in the dark caves. A humble plea. A plea. In the end, Huai finally heard the hollow and numb voice. The man raised his head and looked at Huai. It was as if he had caught a glimpse of an outsider who had broken into this dream from a long time ago. The hoarse voice was like thunder, bursting out from Huai's soul, almost causing his consciousness to collapse. He said, "Please, mourn for him." Chapter 839. Please, mourn for him. The dream seemed to be stung by those words. It was obviously a humble request, but it carried a power that could not be disobeyed by Huai. That low command kept echoing in his mind, overlapping and turning into hysterical roars and echoes, almost filling every corner of Huai's consciousness. It made his will quickly become dizzy, and he understood this sadness, crying out loud with the other party. An invisible whirlpool appeared and pulled him in, as if it was trying to pull him into some place. No grief, sorry to disturb, goodbye. Huai instinctively swung his hand, and then at that moment, he heard thunder in the distance. A sharp bolt of lightning flashed across the void and struck his head. It made him wake up from the dream. Opening his eyes, he saw an unfamiliar ceiling. He was panting violently, sweating profusely. There was still a faint stinging on his face, and his whole body was numb. His face was full of nosebleeds, and there were bubbles at the corners of his mouth. When he turned around and looked at the bedside, he saw hatred leaning on the bed. On the broken weapon, there were streaks of frost and scorch marks. That was the cause of the thunder in the dream. The silent miracle sensed the abnormality in the surroundings and instinctively operated, destroying this inexplicable dream, allowing him to wake up. Although this method was a bit rough, high-voltage electrotherapy was really too much. "Thank you." Huai patted hatred with gratitude, rubbed his stiff neck, got up, and walked to the bathroom. After washing his face, he finally understood the situation a little. Was it an illusion, a delusion, or something else? He couldn't figure it out, but he had had similar experiences countless times. Celestial genealogies, strong compatibility with the abyss, and the blessing of the Book of Destiny almost made him a psychic. If he was not careful, he would trigger something. He would see ghosts at every turn. However, Huaisher felt that this time was different from the past, because its ending was exceptionally different. At the end of the nightmare, just before Huaisher woke up, he seemed to hear a familiar laughter. It was like a passerby watching a melon, looking at the haggard man in the dream in Huaisher's appearance, incomparably mocking. It was a completely heartless rhetorical question. What? A pure passerby, speaking the truth. Indeed, Huaisher deeply agreed. What's the situation here? Who are you mourning for? Who died? How did they die? Where? Wasn't it inappropriate to invite a passerby to participate in the funeral for no reason? From the looks of it, he did not even plan to give a red packet. Asking someone to be a filial son with empty words wasn't too insincere. Since the other party was the first to be unkind, Huaisher wouldn't have any psychological pressure to be wicked. He washed his face, brushed his teeth, paid the origin substance protection fee for brother-hateful water, and shaved the dog's fur. Because he was unfamiliar with the technique, he was bitten a few times, he clearly came out to attend an advanced course, but why did he have to bring a family with him, as if he was a nanny? There was also a black-hearted woman who was even more difficult to serve. He did not know where she had run off to. Life was not easy. Huaisher sighed. The only good news was the notice from the alchemy puppet. In another hour, they would arrive at the Helios workshop. However, there was more bad news than he had imagined. After Huaisher finished his breakfast and followed the guidance to the lounge, he felt the strange atmosphere in the lounge. It was incomparably solemn. Everyone's face was gloomy, and there was a bad feeling floating in the air. Only that guy, Izzy, was still humming a song, smoking his seemingly endless cigar as he greeted Huaisher. What's wrong? Huaisher walked over and looked around. He did not know if it was an illusion or something, but it felt like there were fewer people. Not everyone is here yet, he asked. No, if you don't count Galander, you're probably the last one. Izzy, who was well-informed, said with a smile, Something bad happened. I thought you wouldn't be able to come. Huaisher was instantly alert. Last night, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, all the cyborgs on Leviathan's sun stopped operating, Izzy said. Inexplicably, without any warning, no matter where it was, it all went down. Wait, what do you mean by down? Based on the external situation, it's probably sleeping. Izzy shrugged helplessly. I really don't understand. Cyborgs are so thin that they can't even sleep, yet they can dream. It's really a great discovery across centuries. No matter what secret method was used to control them, there was no response, and they were completely in a scrapped state. After dismantling them, there was no abnormality. Even if a new batch was created, they would still lose their response after a few seconds. This was enough to give people a headache, but it's not just that. Saying that, he looked meaningfully at Huaisher. What are you looking at me for? Huaisher became alert. This has nothing to do with me. Why would I come on board to mess with your cyborgs when I have nothing to do? No, I was just surprised. With your keen senses, you were actually able to come out unscathed. This really makes me heave a huge sigh of relief. When he said that, Izzy's smile did not change at all, and it seemed that he did not know what she meant. She just raised her hand and pulled out a gemstone pendant that had completely lost its luster from under her collar, and asked casually, That dream, you should have dreamed about it too, right? Huaisher's eyes widened. Hearing his voice, the alchemists around all looked over, but their expressions were not good. It was not until now that Huaisher finally realized. It seemed that the strange dream this time was not a single case, but a $50 Ferrari coupon, and everyone had a share. But since Izzy said so, yes, some people were left in that dream. Izzy shrugged regretfully. They haven't been able to wake up yet. Garlandion is trying, but the success rate is slim. In a long silence, Huaisher felt a burst of fear. But soon, he realized that something was wrong. Can't they wake up with a little stimulation? He asked doubtfully. How come there are still people who haven't woken up? As soon as he said that, the look in everyone's eyes became subtle. He did not know whether it was jealousy or astonishment. But soon, when they saw the scars on his face and arms that were bitten by the dog, they suddenly understood and became admiring. To be able to be bitten by a dog and wake up, he could be considered talent. Your dog is so powerful? Izzy was also dumbfounded and could not believe it. Do you want to borrow it? The broken dog sat next to Huaishur and yawned lazily. Its tongue was paralyzed, and when it smiled evilly, it revealed 3 rows of overlapping sharp teeth that were still glowing with a metallic light. It was like a razor with a hook, which made people feel cold all over. No, I don't think it will work. The corner of Huaishur's eyes twitched. But what was that saying again? If you want to try, I won't force you. He gradually understood in his heart. Perhaps he did not wake up because of the hateful water's electric shock, because when he woke up, he was already foaming at the mouth. Who knew how long the hateful water had electrocuted him? What did you dream of? He asked tentatively. There's nothing to hide about this. Everyone dreams of the same thing. A man with a haggard face who looks like a tramp is wandering around the barren land, as if he's in a hurry to visit his grave, looking for someone to eat at his family's banquet. There was no exception. Even the race, hair color, and height were no different. A middle-aged man with blonde hair and blue eyes, riding a horse in black, with an empty scabbard at his waist and 10 fingers full of scars, wandered like a gravedigger. After summarizing, everyone found that those who woke up were the ones who did not answer him. Some people even used various methods to force themselves to wake up the moment they realized that the dream did not come from them. Either it was an alchemy secret instrument, a strange relic, or through their own sacred mark. A prodigal second generation like Izzy even used a substitute living stone that could block a fatal curse at a critical moment and replace his death. It could only be said that he was worthy of being a player with money. The most peculiar one was Rachel. The pale-faced man curled up in the corner. His eyes were bloodshot, but his spirit was incredible. Like a bird startled by the twang of a bow, he did not dare to sleep at all since he was scared out of his wits by the attacker. He did not expect that by a freak combination of factors, he would escape this sudden wave of death. It can only be said that he was lucky. But in Izzy's narration, Huaishur found another strange thing. No one dreamed of the last voice in Huaishur's memory. Now you know how good your sister is, right? Tongi's phantom appeared on Huaishur's shoulder, and her tone was full of joy. This is the value of a big sister. Not only can she intoxicate the contractor, but she can also wake up her family's idiot at a critical moment. Wake me up. Just the bill and the tragic reality are enough. Thank you. Huaishur covered his face and sighed. He definitely fell into a trap this time. No, as early as when Tongi wanted to go out together, he should have understood that this could not be a sweet 2-person trip. Oh, it's really a dangerous and bumpy journey. After all the hardships and suffering, under the support of hard work and friendship, everyone is about to successfully reach the destination. Tongi said with emotion, just thinking about this, I can't help but feel moved. Enough, Tongi. Let's not put the flag anymore, okay? Huaishur suspected that she would never stop until she blew up this broken boat. What are you afraid of? Tongi looked over in confusion. Aren't we already here? As she spoke, she raised her wings and pointed to the end of the lounge, where a huge window occupied the entire space. In the dark universe, a blurry silhouette slowly appeared. The son of Leviathan sang a whale song and silently swam in the vacuum of hell, quickly passing through the planetary ring formed by dust and meteorites in front of him. In just one night, he crossed a long distance calculated in units of hundreds of millions of kilometers. Then, everyone caught a glimpse of the terrifying phenomenon formed by the countless hells below, surging with the tide of the abyss. Separated by a distant depth, the huge force stirred up the matter of the present realm, causing the surface of the gathered stars to form a never-ending hurricane. Countless amounts of molten metal and dense liquid hydrogen boiled within, turning into a chaotic cauldron. Layers upon layers of dizzying ripples were constantly being produced. Amidst the countless turbulent flows and violent changes, There was a cyclone that was so huge that it could swallow the entire present realm. It was spinning crazily. It looked like an eye from the abyss looking into the present realm, ferocious and cold. It looked indifferently at this group of visitors who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. At this moment, right above the most famous devil's eye on Jupiter, in the synchronous orbit of the stars, the tragic and deformed outline gradually became clear. One could barely distinguish the glorious and solemn posture of the past. It was the scorching iron temple that operated in the sky during the mythological era. But now, the behemoth had been completely penetrated by countless sharp, giant pillars, and the other half had collapsed, twisted, and tilted into a strange appearance that no postmodern architect could imagine. Wisps of scarlet leaked out from the various scar-like cracks, spreading in all directions. Like the umbilical cord of a strangled baby, it floated in the vacuum. Only a silent cry of grief remained. It echoed in the minds of all the witnesses. It lasted for a long time. This was the remains of Helios. Chapter 840. What is that? Huaishir was stunned and murmured softly. For a moment, Huaishir suspected that he had not woken up from the nightmare. But when he determined that he was completely awake, he wished that he was still in that nightmare. He was silent for a long time and looked at Tangi. Where is the Helios workshop? Tangi was puzzled. Isn't this it? Huaishir swallowed dryly. That, the giant thing that is riddled with holes, full of strange stones everywhere, and seems to have been scrapped and broken down? This was the great miracle that carried hundreds of alchemists and was maintained by countless androids in the information he collected. It was so prosperous that it seemed to have returned to the era of the gods. It was like a small world sailing in the vacuum, always emitting a brilliant flame, solemn and sacred, and operating in the universe like the sun's wheel. This was the Helios chariot? Huaishir lowered his head, took out his mobile phone, raised his hand, and compared the original picture on the phone. In this picture observed by Harper 3 years ago, the bright golden city glowed with a magnificent brilliance. Even if it was just a glimpse, the scale observed from the abyss was still incredibly solemn and sacred. And in front of him, this thing was almost scrapped, as if it had been polluted 100,000 times and smashed into pieces. Are you telling me that this is the same thing? I have to say, the last time I was here, it was not like this. Tangi shrugged regretfully. Although I don't know what happened, Helios has become like this. I can't help it. Huaishir asked subconsciously. When was the last time you were here? Tangi did not answer, just smiled. She looked at him with a smile. Huaishir shivered and obediently withdrew his gaze, not daring to ask again. Give me face and let's pretend that nothing happened. He wisely did not dwell on this issue. Well, let's go back to reality. After a long journey in Cantor, they successfully arrived at their destination, which was really gratifying. The good news was that the son of Leviathan did not explode. The bad news was Helios had exploded. Huaishir was about to cry. After the initial shock and sluggishness, all the alchemists quickly reacted. Indescribable panic filled every corner of the lounge. No one would have thought that after 70 years, the once glorious sun chariot would fall to such a state. But in an instant, all of his questions were answered. Why did they have to go through so much trouble to change all kinds of tools and go through such a long journey to arrive? Why did Helios not be able to enter the Earth-Moon space this time? Because it was anchored in the upper layer of Jupiter. And for the looks of it, it didn't look too good in this state. How many functions it still had was another matter. What had attacked Helios and turned him into this state, and whether the alchemists above Helios had any chance of surviving. In the end, was it really the will of the Helios workshop that summoned them here? What? What the hell is going on? Rachel's face twitched, and he turned around sluggishly. Garen Dion, what the hell is going on? Just outside the lounge, Garen Dion, who had just rushed over from the workshop's laboratory, could not hide his weariness. After seeing the scene in front of him, his expression became stiff. It was complicated and stunned. Shortly after, he seemed to have understood something and came to a sudden realization. At that moment, Huaishir was keenly aware of the subtle changes in the old man's expression. He did not know whether it was shock, anger, joy, or sadness, or a combination of all of them. But no matter which it was, it made Huaishir's hair stand on end. So that's how it is, Garen Dunn muttered to himself for a moment before regaining his usual calmness. His majestic gaze swept across, suppressing the uneasy atmosphere in the lounge. But everyone's expression became vigilant. They did not know what the Stoneforge Academy was up to, nor did they understand why they had brought them here. But no matter what they were up to, it was probably not a good thing. They were all alchemists, fanatics who pursued the abyssal taboo. No matter how innocent they were, who did not have taboo artifacts and techniques in their minds. Even Huaishir, who was the weakest here, had a derivative of the element of destruction in his arms, not to mention the forging technique that had once created the eternal Hell's Dusk. Everyone's first reaction was that the Stoneforge Academy was playing a badger game. There must be some unspeakable conspiracy behind this. But soon, Garen Dion reached out and slowly took out a pure white prismatic crystal from his material bag under everyone's watchful eyes. The Stone of Truth. It was the lie detector provided by the Stoneforge Academy during the highest level border trials. It was the purest and weakest crystal in the world. It was extracted from countless languages, but it could not withstand any lies. As long as it was within the range of lies, it would crack. Everyone here was an alchemist. Even a grandmaster could not do anything to this relic, which had an extremely simple internal structure, but extremely complicated refining conditions. After allowing others to check its authenticity, Garen Dion said, I, Garen Van Helt, hereby assure you that the Stoneforge Academy has only received a message from Helios in accordance with the contract and transported the contracted alchemists here on behalf of Helios. In other words, it is Helios himself who has summoned you here. As soon as he said that, everyone stared straight at the Stone of Truth. The pure white surface was flawless. In the corner, the old woman from Egypt, Yima, raised her eyes. Her pupils contracted, and her pupils were vertical like a beast's. In that case, it's just a mission to lead a team. Why bother a grandmaster? As a consultant of the Stoneforge Academy, an influential leader of the upper echelons, and one of only 11 grandmasters in the world, why would she lower herself to lead a team of alchemists? This is the second mission of my trip, Garen Dion replied calmly. According to the observations of the Stoneforge Academy half a year ago, the trajectory of the Helios workshop has been abnormal. There is a high probability that a taboo alchemy secret instrument is being carried out. As a representative of the Stoneforge Academy, I have come this time to investigate and punish the Helios workshop. But I did not expect it to be too late. In just half a year, one of the origins of alchemy, the cherry of the sun god, and one of the top 10 workshops, Helios, had fallen to this extent. Even the alchemists above had probably met with misfortune. Now, Helios had become a dangerous existence comparable to the depths of hell. Master of Metal of the Russian Federation, Valery Yugorov, sneered. Did the Stoneforge Academy not know what happened here before they came? I remember that the Stoneforge Academy is responsible for maintaining 4 of the largest probes in the whole realm, right? And yet, they still brought us nobodies here. Do they expect us to be cannon fodder? In the silence, Garen Dion looked over indifferently. Valerie, you are here because of your contract with Helios. You have accepted Helios relics and gifts, so you have to serve it. You can break the contract and pay the price. But your contract has nothing to do with the Stoneforge Academy. Don't forget the essence of alchemy. If there is a principle in this world called you have to give up something to gain something, then the essence of alchemy was you have to give up something to gain something. In the furnace of constant matter, if you wanted to sublimate, you had to give up the dregs. If you wanted to transform, you had to abandon the old form. The price of all miracles was disaster. The result of all changes was precipitation. At the end of all sublimations, something would be solidified. When you received Helios relics, you were destined to have a relationship with the Helios workshop. Valerie was silent and did not speak. Don't worry, I have no intention of forcing you to work for me, Garen Dion said. Now, The party who cannot fulfill the contract is Helios. It can be attributed to irresistible factors, and it has nothing to do with you. But due to the limitations of my mission, I cannot return until I have a preliminary investigation of what happened on Helios and completed the search and rescue of survivors. If any of you are unwilling to go to Helios, you can wait on the Leviathan's son. All the treatment will not change, but you have to hand over your tokens and accept supervision. As soon as he said that, many people's faces changed. What? Grandmaster, isn't this arrangement a bit too much? What if I say no? Many alchemists had dangerous looks in their eyes. The reason is simple. First of all, only tokens are the only way to enter Helios. Garen Don knocked his cane, and the Leviathan's son let out a mighty roar. Soon, everyone saw that a cyborg was put into a spacesuit and thrown into the vacuum of the universe, gradually moving toward Helios in the distance. And the moment it was dozens of kilometers away from Helios, it exploded into a ball of fire. It instantly turned into ashes and disappeared. As you can see, although Helios is damaged now, it still maintains the operation of the defensive arcanum, the flame of the lunar corona. Garen Dion explained. In alchemy, the counterpart of the sun was the existence of the moon. As the symbol of the sun, Helios' chariot could naturally stimulate the power of the corona and use unparalleled heat to destroy the enemy. But that kind of highest output, even with Helios' countless years of accumulation of source form, could not be maintained for a long time. What's more, it was a weapon of destruction, not a shield. Therefore, there was the existence of the transformation arcanum. Through the arcanum, the existence of the invisible moon was projected around Helios, using the illusory moon to replace the solid solar flames, turning into the surface of the moon. As long as Helios' body existed, such defense could be maintained forever. Now, when Helios lost its response, unless the alchemist who signed a contract with the Helios workshop carried their own credentials, any substance that intruded would be burned into nothingness by the cold flame of the lunar corona. At this moment, everyone understood the conditions that Galandian had put forward when they left the moon. But they immediately realized that something was wrong. The one-eyed Ragnar asked, "Even so, even if we hand over our credentials, Garen Dion, your people can't use it, right? The specific exploration will be carried out by my 7 disciples who have signed a contract with Helios, as well as the alchemist who volunteered to assist." Garen Dion said bluntly, "The reason why I want you to hand over your credentials is just to avoid any unnecessary situations." Speaking to this extent, it was already extremely straightforward. You don't have to participate in the assistance, but don't think about quietly running up to cause trouble. He did not try to hide his suspicion. Garen Dion put the problem on the table from the beginning, not allowing anyone to avoid it. This, after a brief silence, someone forced a laugh. Garen Dion is underestimating us too much, isn't he? Yes, perhaps. Garen Dion retorted indifferently. But some things are clear from the beginning. That's the only way to maintain long-term respect, isn't it? Now that Helios has fallen to such a state, even as a Grandmaster, I don't have any mandatory command over you. So, it's better not to let unnecessary accidents happen from the beginning. Besides, this is also for your safety. Safety? Ragnar sneered. Is it safe to be put under house arrest and watched? It's just a consideration that some of you may not have pure intentions. Garen Dion glanced at him. For example, you, Mr. Ragnar. As the future successor of the Silver Monument, you don't need Helios to stand at a height that many people can't reach in their lifetime. So why are you here? And Mr. Izzy, the inheritor of noble blood in America, who is not even an alchemist, has his own credential. You can't really be here to visit relatives and friends, can you? Ms. Yima, as the efficient of the god of Bast and the daughter of the pharaoh, even if you are here to seek a higher realm, why don't you visit the endless treasure house of Egypt? And Mr. Huaishur, his cold eyes suddenly looked at Huaishur, who was silently watching the show in the corner. As the master of Dambua, who has a high status and a registered military officer of the Astronomical Association, you have never been known for alchemy, nor have you ever pursued the essence of alchemy. You even have a complete legacy of the Creator. But now, why are you here? This Weisher was dumbfounded. Old man, are you crazy? Can't I be here to study hard and improve myself every day? How can you underestimate my passion for alchemy? How dare you slander my character and character? Weisher's expression became serious, and he was about to refute loudly, but then he suddenly realized that he seemed to be, maybe, which wave of people with impure intentions. Chapter 841. He pondered for a moment, calmly analyzed, and carefully considered. Weisher suddenly realized that what Galander said actually made sense. After all, he did not need anything else other than the few pieces of reflective crystals in their garage. Even before he set off, he was already planning to get himself a job in Helios. No matter what, he was not a good person. For a moment, Weisher's furious expression stiffened. After taking a few breaths, it magically turned into a shy and innocent smile. What are you talking about? Everyone knows that I, Weisher, have always kept my promises. I'm a rare example in this world. Galander seemed to believe such a shameless boast and did not question it anymore. Well, since things have come to this, I believe that you don't need any more pleasing words. The old man solemnly announced the conditions. Those who are not willing to help me can hand over the proof and wait in the Leviathan's sun. After that, no matter if you file a complaint or announce it to everyone, I will not defend myself. But if you can't accept such conditions, you can also challenge me here. When he said that, a ferocious shadow slowly emerged behind him. Countless surging waves of source substance and complicated arcane rituals gathered in the solemn and cold silhouette, outlining the holy facial features and eyes. The face that resembled Galander's when he was young contained indescribable divinity and brilliance, eternal calmness, and a faint smile with a mysterious charm. It was like a statue that did not exist in this place. The moment it appeared, it made everyone's heart heavy and full of depression. It was no doubt Galander's creation, the divine mark that established the name of the Grandmaster. It was even possible that there was authority hidden in it. Weisher did not feel any premonition of death, but he could not feel any hostility or desire to attack. His heart was calm and peaceful, so peaceful that he felt a little nauseous. Even a negative energy engine had stopped. Only the divinity that Great Si Ming was recovering was trembling violently, resisting the pervasive impact and maintaining its existence. If it were any other divine mark without divinity, it would have collapsed and been purified in an instant under the gaze of the sculpture. The expressions of everyone in the lounge changed drastically, but soon, without exception, they all calmed down again. It could be said to be peaceful. Even if he suddenly died now, his corpse would definitely have a relieved smile on his face. Any alchemist who is willing to assist in the investigation is naturally welcome, Garland Dion said slowly. In the meantime, you can ask me any questions about alchemy. Other than providing the necessary protection, I can promise that everything discovered during the exploration process, as long as it doesn't involve any key items, it will belong to you. Even if you want to take it back, I will represent the Stone Cauldron Society in exchange for it. The corners of Weisher's eyes twitched. This old man actually opened a cram school and asked people to work for him. He directly used Helios's money to hire people to work for him. Why did he seem to have seen this operation before? But it just so happened that everyone was tempted. It was hard to resist. The guidance of a great grandmaster and the treasures in the Helios workshop. The former was absolutely irresistible honey for an alchemist, while the latter was an irresistible temptation for every speculator. The treasury of the era of gods, the source of all alchemy in the world, not to mention the countless precious materials, relics from the border, and even the rare miraculous engravings in the world, even the authority, even just the items, notes, and works left behind by the alchemists were immeasurable treasures. Even Weisher was tempted for a moment, but he soon calmed down. This was the advantage of having the ivory tower and the backing of the Stone Cauldron Society. After reaching a certain status, he would never lack what he should have. As for more, as long as he was willing to take on more responsibilities, he would be able to reap greater rewards. There was no need to be jealous of these things. It was just that he was a little worried about the existence of the reflection crystal. But at this moment, everyone's breathing instantly became heavy. Even the remnant of the sacred charm in the air could not erase the endless greed in their hearts. Only the old priestess Yima raised her eyes and suddenly asked, "Does the Stone Cauldron Society want to completely annex the Helios workshop?" Galandon did not answer. He just waited quietly. "Go, fool. What are you waiting for?" Tongi's demonic whisper rang in his ears again. But the little angel in Huaishi's heart was also restless. He nodded in agreement. "Yes, yes. Isn't this because I'm afraid of danger?" Huaishi was alert. "Are you stupid? No matter how dangerous it is, it's not as dangerous as the elemental destruction you have in your arms." Tongi squinted at him. "If we're talking about danger, I think you're much more dangerous than Helios now." What she said seemed to make sense. "Roar. Besides, think about it. Isn't this pretty good?" Tongi said, "The Stone Cauldron Society supports you to dig up Helios' grave. Everything you dig up is yours. Others don't have such a convenient space backpack like you. If you bring a few more backpacks, Domba's economy will take off in advance. The future of the hybrids depends on you digging up graves. Come on." The more she said, the more Huaishi felt unreliable. His expression gradually became suspicious. But Tongi rolled her eyes at him. "Think about the luminous crystal and the other technologies on it. Why can't you think about it? It's just a dungeon. What's there to be afraid of?" "No, I'm not afraid of dungeons. I'm afraid of you." Huaishi trembled with anger. Just as he was talking to Tongi, there were already people who were tempted and got up to sign the contract. With the first one taking the lead, most of the people behind signed their names on Galandon's contract relic and joined the army of tool men. Ragna, Valerie, and so on were among them. Of course, there were also people who knew what they were capable of. After signing another contract, they handed over their credentials and got up to leave. When it was Izzy's turn, the man smoking the cigar looked at the contract in Galandon's hand with a half-smile. "If it's me, forget it, right? I don't want to ruin your good thing." Galandon gave him a deep look. For a long time, he didn't speak. He actually acquiesced to him, keeping his credentials and doing whatever he wanted. For a moment, many people showed an angry look, but they couldn't say anything. After a moment of silence, the old priestess finally wrote her name on the contract to participate in the operation. But as soon as her name fell, it quickly disappeared, leaving only a trace. That was the divine protection in her bloodline. The divine grace from the cat god allowed her to be free from the restraint of the contract, but she still couldn't get rid of the influence of the contract. Huaishi was envious. Being the nth generation of gods was good. Even the overlord contract didn't have any restraint. After all, even Huaishi's divinity couldn't resist the coercion of the contract. The moment Huaishi's name was written, it only lit up a little and then quickly extinguished. At best, it was just a little bit less. This also meant that once he violated the prohibitions on the contract, he would suffer a backlash. To a certain extent, Garandon had taken control of his lifeline. Seeing that Huaishi was so cooperative, Galandon was stunned for a moment. Huaishi returned to the corner, smiling and touching the Book of Destiny in his soul without saying a word. He wasn't worried at all. No matter how strong the backlash was, it could suppress his horoscope, but could it suppress the Book of Destiny? At best, it would be a little trouble. No matter how fierce it was, could it be more powerful than the thing suppressed in his ultimate? As long as I have enough explosives in my arms, no one can hurt me. After understanding this, Huaishi's mood became more and more cheerful. In the end, the people who signed the contract accounted for 4/5 of the original number of people. It seemed that the value of Helios's collection and the Grand Master's guidance was more exaggerated than Huaishi thought. Unexpectedly, the pharmacist Rachel was also on the list of members of the exploration team. Sweaty and pale, he was shivering in the corner. But when he sensed Huaishi's gaze, his expression immediately turned vicious, and he looked over with a gloomy expression. It was as if he was offended. "Wow, So scary, so scary, Huaisher sighed and shrugged. He withdrew his gaze and looked at the dark space outside the lounge window. Directly above the Jupiter demon's eye, Helios was silently spinning above the storm. His broken body, riddled with holes, reflected the dim sunlight in the distance. There was an illusionary wail that disappeared in the darkness. About a few hours later, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the son of Leviathan, who repeatedly wandered around Helios, finally confirmed the damage of Helios from a distance. Not only has it lost the parts that have been repaired over the years, but even the original structure has been damaged. After the projection, Galandian raised his cane and introduced the situation to the first batch of exploration team members. The outer residential area built by the alchemists over the years has collapsed, and the production lines on the left and right wings were not spared. The observation area and the test area were the most severely damaged. The circulation area and the material reserve area are also gone. Today, most of Helios cannot maintain a normal ecology. The worst-case scenario is that inside the Helios workshop, more than 17 of the 32 paths connected by the spheroid have been scrapped. The loss was heavy. No one knew what kind of attack and disaster could cause such a terrible result. As the sun chariot of the past, the Helios workshop itself was a relic that once symbolized the authority of the sun. In addition to the areas divided by functions, its essence was also established according to the foundation of alchemy. It was divided into 4 boundaries: activity, creation, formation, and outflow. Of course, according to the translation and understanding of various languages, there were also pronouns such as divinity, matter, and so on. But this was not important. What was important was that now, of the 4 boundaries that maintained the operation of the Helios workshop, 1 had been completely scrapped, 2 were seriously damaged, and the remaining core, the formation boundary, could not be observed from the outside. The balance of the 3 pillars was broken, and more than half of the 32 blood vessel-like sphero pathways were lost. One could imagine the terrible situation inside. In order to ensure the safety of the first batch of alchemists, Galandian had made preparations. From the action route to the specific situation response, everything was ready. But what Huaisher was more curious about was, how did you know so much information that was considered top secret even within the inner circle of Helios? Chapter 842. It's not that surprising. Izzy, who was next to him, seemed to see Huaisher's confusion and answered with a smile. Before Garland Dion became a Grandmaster, he also spent 70 years on Helios. F***CK. Both of you. Why do you all know how to read minds? It's not that I can read minds, it's that I'm curious. Izzy shrugged and smoked her cigar happily. Huaisher couldn't help but take out his phone and take a selfie. From the beginning to the end, he just had a cold and calm face. Since graduating from AI Ching's training class, he had never made a mistake in controlling his expression. Who would believe him? But the problem was Garland Dion actually spent 70 years on Helios. Wouldn't that be a full round-trip cycle? But now he looked like he was only in his 50s. Huaisher's expression twitched, and he asked softly, "How old is Garland Dion?" About 210 years old." Izzy thought for a moment and replied, "After all, he's a grandmaster. It's not surprising that he has a way to retain his youth." Damn, another old monster. As if he heard the conversation between the 2 people at the back of the team, Garland Dion, who was at the front, glanced at them and quickly looked away again. He continued to talk about the exploration plan. The first exploration team didn't ask for in-depth investigation, and the task wasn't difficult. They just needed to establish a safe station for subsequent exploration at the internal entrance of the Helios workshop. They were doing the work of photographing the MCV. The Grand Master commanded from a distance, and everyone obeyed his orders. After confirming that everyone understood the plan, Garland Dion nodded and motioned for the disciples to distribute the things in the box. It was a small bag that was large enough to be worn on the arm of a spacesuit, and it contained a bright crystal boundary marker. Simply put, it was a one-time return scroll. After a short channeling time, they could immediately return to the bridge of the Leviathan's sun. Well, Huaisher didn't know the name of the place, but it looked like a bridge, so he called it that. In addition, each person also received 10 servings of silver blood medicine, as well as 10 servings of origin substance. In terms of expenditure alone, before they even left the house, each of them already had more than $50 million worth of supplies on them. This did not include the cost of custom-made boundary markers. However, Huaisher could not help but have doubts in his mind again. Something like a boundary marker took a lot of time to make, and its application was limited and there were many restrictions. Most importantly, once it was made, it would have to face a short shelf life of half a month. Huaisher was very curious. How did they prepare so many people's portions in such a short time? Was a great Grandmaster realm so awesome? Because of Grandmaster Mikhail, he had gone deep into the records of the Grandmaster. Of the 11 people in the entire territory, only 10 remained after Pubris's death. These 10 people were recognized as the pinnacle of alchemy in the world. But none of the alchemists understood the realm of the great Grandmaster. Because there was no such realm. It was just a title. In addition, every alchemist specialized in a completely different field of study. It was very difficult to have the same standard for judging them. But given the stinginess of the Stone Cauldron Association, every great Grandmaster title was given out with extreme caution. If there were no truly epic-making discoveries or achievements, they would never be recognized. This made it so that it was impossible to reach that realm in terms of years of hard work and proficiency. Alchemists who could become great Grandmasters were terrifying individuals who were 1 in 10,000, or even 1 in a billion. Once they reached that realm, they could not be considered human anymore. And from the information that Huaisher had gathered, Garland Dion was at the very top of the great Grandmaster realm. He had lived for 210 years. Who knew how many disasters and miracles he had encountered, and who knew how many storms he had experienced. Suchun had personally witnessed how much damage Grandmaster Mikhail could cause when he flipped a table. Once the dome giant Atlas entered the completion stage, it would not be a problem for him to destroy the entire infernal realm. Moreover, to be able to hold a high position in the Stone Cauldron Association, where there were many factions and internal strife, proved that he was definitely not someone to be trifled with. Huaisher was gradually unable to maintain his former respect for him. Instead, he was full of fear and vigilance. But Garland Dion did not care. After calmly arranging everything, the final segment began. To answer the doubts of every participant, one question per person. Outside the workshop, Izzy, who was smoking a cigar, was lying on the sofa in the lounge area, humming a song indifferently. He suddenly turned around and asked, "Have you thought of what to ask?" "There's nothing to ask." Huaisher shook his head. Indeed, in the mysterious and complex field of alchemy, he might have just made a little achievement, but this did not prevent him from having many followers around him. Even if Tangi was often unreliable and liked to play disappearing. But further away, there was Grandmaster Mikhail on the Iron Crystal Throne who could help him. Closer, there were countless alchemists in the Ivory Tower's alchemy workshop who could teach him step by step. At the very least, there was still a little bit of friendship with the Sunmaker in the Abyss. Huaisher was not afraid of not being able to learn, but he was afraid of having too many things to learn and not being able to finish learning. For the next few years, he did not intend to put his efforts into alchemy outside of metallurgy. Therefore, this reward was a bit of a waste for him. However, there was nothing he wanted to know about alchemy, but in other areas, he had a lot of questions to ask. It all depended on whether Garland Dion was willing to answer his doubts. When Rachel hurriedly pushed the door open, Izzy got up and waved her hand to go in. After a few minutes, she came out leisurely. It was as if she had a cup of tea, relaxed and happy. She waved at Huaisher. "It's your turn." When Huaisher pushed the door open and entered, he saw the old man in front of the workshop fire. "Garland Dion." Huaisher nodded and bowed with his hand on his chest. "I think we can skip the formalities between us." Garland Dion turned around and looked at him. Compared with the pair of old eyes and the fire in the furnace, it was hard to tell which one was brighter. "I'm very curious about your question, Huaisher," the old man said. "But before that, I hope you can understand one thing. I don't want any accidents to happen in this exploration, especially because of you. Do I look so unreliable? Huaishur laughed. How can a hero of Donbua be an easy character to get along with? Garland Dion said indifferently. I heard that Mikhail even used you as the fire in the furnace core and used you as the starting point to carry out the smelting of images again. As a grandmaster, how can I underestimate his foresight? He said, for any grandmaster, you are a rare catalyst. Your fate, your style, and your orientation will stimulate all contradictions in the most thorough way. I have to be prepared early. After hearing this, Huaishur was stunned for a long time and could not help but shrug. I have to say that this is all a coincidence. Fate has never been a coincidence. Huaishur never. Garland Dion lowered his head and stared at the metal sculpture of the angel's face at the front of the cane. Suddenly, he said, let me hear your question. What question would the only maker in this world have to ask me? In fact, I don't have any questions about alchemy that I would like to ask you to answer. Huaishur raised his hand and rubbed his eyebrows. I don't like this attitude and decision that treats me as a flammable object, although it seems very reasonable. In fact, I have never wanted to be anyone's stepping stone. He told the old man in front of him, it's usually those people who ask for trouble. I only have one question, Grandmaster Garland. My purpose is very simple. Huaishur raised his eyes and asked straightforwardly, where is Helios's luminous crystal? Huaishur did not care whether Garland Dion wanted to annex Helios or what he wanted to do. He did not want to get involved in trouble that did not belong to him. Therefore, he did not bother to play any riddles with Garland Dion. His purpose for coming here was that simple. Anyway, Helios was not the only place that had the luminous crystal. If worst came to worst, Helios would blow it up and he would go elsewhere to find it. If worst came to worst, he might as well go to the Astronomy Society. Besides, if he could not go to London, he could still go to Doomsday. He just did not want to owe a new favor before he had repaid the luminous crystal of the past. All roads lead to Rome. If not Rome, it leads to Yinjing. If not Yinjing, there were still Cairo, York, and St. Petersburg. Why do I have to hang myself on this tree? Without you and the butcher, do you think I would be able to eat meat with hair on it? Silence. A long silence. The old man raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Huaishur. The look in his eyes seemed to be surprised, but also seemed to be self-deprecating and helpless. It was meaningful, but there was no confusion or confusion. It was as if he had foreseen something. Of course, he knew where Helios's luminous crystal was kept. He even knew it like the back of his hand. It was precisely because of this that he felt particularly ironic and emotional. I see. It seems that the heir chosen by Russell is you. He nodded in understanding, raised his palm toward the fire, and flicked his fingers. Then the fire jumped. Magnificent flashes emerged from it, intertwined and transformed. Soon, the temperature in the changing fire faded, and the final process was completed. The countless changes in an instant, even Huaishur's alchemy fire could not compare. Finally, a key appeared in front of Huaishur. You're giving up what is close at hand for what is far away, Garland Dion said. If you had made such a request when you were on the moon, I could have even used the inventory of the Stoneware Society in exchange for your return. Of course, if you are willing to stay here until the end of the exploration and return to the present, I can also fulfill my promise. But I guess you prefer to take it yourself. What is this? Huaishur took the key and noticed the complicated alchemy array in it. Countless tiny primordial flowed in it, outlining a dazzlingly complex structure. But the structure was of no use. It was just complicated and difficult to be replicated. It only existed as a verification of something. This is my authorization certificate in Helios, Galdion said. Although I have been away for so long, I am afraid the rules won't change so quickly. As far as I know, a treasure like the luminous crystal should be kept in the core area's vault, between Hephaestus. As he moved, a complicated map appeared in the air, pointing to the deepest part of Helios, the core of the broken labyrinth. However, now that the core of Helios is out of control, all the alert measures and defense arrays will be activated. "It won't be easy to get in," he said. "As someone who once received Helios's favor, I can't help you anymore. What you want to get will depend on your own ability." "Thank you, but it's okay if it's a little troublesome." Huaisher weighed the key in her hand and threw it into her pocket. But before turning to leave, Huaisher couldn't help but turn back and ask, "But I think, as someone who received Helios's favor, I'm afraid you shouldn't encourage others to take advantage of the situation, right?" Galdeon didn't answer. His expression was the same as usual, and he just waved his hand. He signaled that it was time for him to leave. Just like that, a few hours later, it was 6:10 p.m. in the present time. The first batch of exploration team members stood in front of the exit, repeatedly confirming and checking all their equipment, put on their helmets, and were ready to go, heading to the broken chariot in the orbit of Jupiter. Only Huaisher was still squatting on the ground, looking at the friendly puppy in front of him, scratching his head. "Is it really okay to wear this thing?" Chapter 843. After the encounter on the moon, Huaisher had a deep understanding that in space, his adaptability might not be better than a dog's. Moreover, it was a baby of Bichimo's, a super fighting dog that could pull a sled in a vacuum with its tongue. It would definitely be of help. According to Garlandon's information, if this dog stayed in Huaisher's bag, it should be able to pass the verification as an accessory of Huaisher. In theory, there was no problem, but there were always accidents. What if something happened and the friendly puppy died? That was the heat radiation that was comparable to the surface of the sun. Let alone a dog, maybe even a person would be gone. And in the saddlebag, the dog's eyes became more and more contemptuous. It stuck its head out and looked at him sideways. "What are you doing? Let's go. The bus is about to leave. We're just waiting for you." "Well, if the dog is not afraid, what am I afraid of? Since you want to try, then let's try." Huaisher shook his head, picked up the saddlebag, and turned to the departing team behind him. The other alchemists had been waiting impatiently for a long time. Only Izzy was still unhurriedly playing with her mobile phone, looking at the pre-cached video and laughing heartily. Compared with him, Rachel, who looked like he was about to pee in his spacesuit, was the polar opposite. Unlike the others, Rachel was accompanying as a doctor. No one had any expectations for his performance. At the same time, they sincerely hoped that he would not be needed. In this way, the air pressure was adjusted. As the hatch on the belly of the Leviathan's sun slowly opened, they slowly sank into the endless dark space below. It was like falling into an abyss. Endless storms surged on the colorful stars below. Above the huge devil's eye, the wreckage of Helios reflected the sunlight from hundreds of millions of kilometers away. It was still difficult to hide the decadent and strange atmosphere. Originally, Huaisher thought that the Stone Cauldron Society had some more mysterious and fantastical tools, but he did not expect that the transportation they were provided with was an upgraded version of an underwater motorcycle. A brass-colored oval-shaped jet, like a rocket, dragged the folded frontline exploration base. At the same time, the safety rope for the 10 of them was also hanging. Under the push of the airflow, it seemed to be moving slowly, but it was actually moving rapidly downwards. He could already vaguely feel the gravity of Jupiter. He could also feel Helios' miserable state more and more. The body of the ship that was riddled with holes was covered in scars, spurting out countless colors that resembled blood. The scarlet colors danced in the vacuum like hungry hands trying to grab all the living things that came close. It was like lava spewing out of a volcano. It was an activation disaster caused by a miraculous reversal when a large-scale secret instrument went out of control. Just like the radiation after a nuclear reactor leak, Helios, who was now out of control, was constantly creating phenomena that only appeared in the depths of hell. It was hard to imagine how bad the internal situation would be. Although in theory, the exploration team was also responsible for rescuing survivors. Were there really any survivors among them? Countless space horror movies had illustrated this point. Don't expect anything good to be in the abandoned ship that floated over out of nowhere. Now, Huaisher finally had a deep understanding. At the same time, he found that this abandoned ship, wasn't it a little too big? Looking from afar, it seemed to be only the size of a thumb, but the closer they got, the faster it enlarged. In the end, it occupied Huaisher's entire field of vision, but the distance between them was still extremely exaggerated. After half an hour, they were still far from boarding the ship. In the dead silence, no one spoke. Even if they were not burned to death by the lunar corona flame and successfully approached Helios, they still did not have any thoughts of rejoicing. In the public channel, there was only suppressed, heavy breathing. Helios's twisted body was rapidly approaching. The closer they got, the more they could feel the ravages and pain it had experienced. Those solemn and glorious sacred decorations of the past had all dimmed and fallen apart. The huge crack was still spewing out frozen liquid and air. It was like the corpse was still bleeding. Every time they went down a certain distance, the alchemists of the Stoneforge Academy would release a few cubes that wandered in the vacuum and let them fly down. These living relics that were endowed with miracles would collect data and feed it back to their eyes and to the son of Leviathan. The rapidly descending observation, I arrived one step ahead of them. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air when they saw the scene that was transmitted back. It was unimaginably huge. The mountain-like gate, the armor that overlapped like scales, and even the huge stone pillars that pierced into the cracks. On the huge obsidian-like pillar, it was moving slightly, and purple-blue blood vessels appeared. There were more observation eyes that were continuously sending back information. They tried to go deeper, but there was no possibility of going deeper. Just below them, the gate that was as big as a football field had lost its response and was covered by a layer of squirming stone. Countless branches that looked like sea snakes slithered on the surface. It didn't look like something that was harmless to humans or animals. It seems to be some kind of parasitic substance bred in the deep sedimentation. Don't get close. The analysis from the son of Leviathan rang in everyone's ears. It seems that the gate of foundation is no longer passable. Adopt the second plan. Enter from the Kingdom Gate. Soon, the jet that landed straight adjusted its angle and headed toward the end of Helios that stretched for hundreds of miles. There were a total of 11 entrances to the Helios workshop. Except for the main entrance that had never been opened, the other 10 entrances were used for the flow of materials and personnel. They were named after the 10 major alchemy source substances. The closest gate of foundation had been contaminated. Rashly approaching, it was tantamount to entering the tiger's den. It was not suitable as a frontline supply base. They could only change it to the Kingdom Gate in the plan. The kingdom represented the 4 major elements, symbolizing the existence of people and materials, and at the same time, it was the end of the 10 major source substances. When he saw this jaw-dropping circular entity with his own eyes, Huaisher's mind suddenly came to a realization. It was as if a missing piece of a puzzle had been added. The countless understanding of metal in his mind suddenly collided again and combined into something he had never imagined. Once again, he had a new understanding of alchemy. I see. For a moment, Huaisher actually forgot where he was. Unable to suppress his excitement, he stared at Helios below with his eyes wide open, hoping to distinguish the traces of what was once intact from the surface of the devastation and find more inspiration and knowledge. The more focused he stared, the clearer the understanding in his heart, emerging one after another, until a tragic scream sounded from the public channel. The ear-piercing sound and the premonition of death that was close at hand woke him up instantly. Only then did he hear the repeated warnings in the public channel. In the sound of electric current and ear-piercing noise, someone shouted with all his might, "Don't look!" But it was too late. Before he was awakened, someone was already fascinated by the scene. At the outermost edge, the person's eyes were wide open, immersed in this indescribably huge understanding. Pulling on the safety rope had reached its limit, but he still subconsciously pounced toward the hull below, his hands constantly groping in the void, immersed in the increasing understanding and knowledge, until a shrill scream burst out from his throat. Too much understanding, and too much knowledge drilled into his brain from his eyes. The knowledge, which was full of miracles and weight, glowed with heat in his eyes and poured into his skull endlessly, occupying his soul and dominating everything. Endless knowledge seemed to bring endless power. I understand. In the midst of the painful scream, a deranged smile appeared on that face. So that's how it is. I understand. In a trance, everyone saw it. There was a viscous substance that extended from Helios. That was the wisdom and knowledge that had collapsed in Helios. At this moment, under the fusion of the furnace that had gone out of control, it became an indescribable curse. Like seaweed, it waved its eyes around. Now, those strands of memory had already entered that person's head, deep into the soul. It gave him understanding, gave him the essence, and gave him unreserved understanding. That terrifying comprehension, which was close to a disaster, urged his soul to operate on its own. In this space where origin substance had dried up, using his spacesuit as a furnace, he spontaneously transformed his body and origin substance. With his soul as the fire, true knowledge as the fuel, the irreversible alchemy began. Terrifying flames spewed out from that person's mouth and nose. Along with the hiss brought about by the intense pain, his throat was instantly charred from the inside out, followed by his teeth, bones, and even the outer layer of his skin. Complicated secret methods emerged from his body. Using the theory that the human body corresponded to the universe and the 9 planets, he began to create a strange new creation. No one knew what he had comprehended, and no one knew what kind of damn thing he could create. But without exception, they could feel the fluctuations of origin substance that was filled with madness. Even the danger of death that was like a dagger at his back. In the instant that he reacted, Huaisher instantly tightened the safety rope, circling around the jet in an arc in the vacuum, and pouncing straight towards the figure swallowed by the flames. The hateful water trembled violently in the bag, already tightly gripped by Huaisher. It struck the outer shell of the jet. There was no loud noise in the vacuum, only sparks bursting out. The heavy force spread along the steel outer shell, reverberating and instantly converging on the other side, shattering the safety rope hook, causing the burning figure to separate from a speeding jet. In an instant, he was left behind. As he stared in shock, the figure gradually distorted, shrunk, and mutated. Countless sharp crystals pierced through his spacesuit, spreading outwards. Breaking through the limits of matter, they actually spread thousands of meters in an instant, expanding to an unimaginable size. Like a blooming flower, they glowed with a magnificent rainbow. Soon, they froze in the vacuum, shattered, turned into flying ash, and disappeared without a trace. Huaisher cautiously held the hateful water and looked around. After a long time, after confirming that there were no abnormalities, he let out a long breath and relaxed. He didn't expect that before the 7 of them had even boarded Helios, one of them had already died. In other words, there was still... Wait. Huaisher stiffened for a moment, feeling a bone-piercing chill. He repeatedly counted in his mind, but no matter how he counted, he couldn't believe it. Why were there still 7 people in the team? Chapter 844. Suddenly, the style of the story changed. It was fine if the fantasy background turned into science fiction, but now it turned into a ghost story? Wasn't this a bit too much? The horror was like ice water, gradually seeping into his bones, but Huaisher's mind began to wander, trying to divert his attention, even though he was panicking. Especially when he flipped back to the Book of Destiny and found that there were 10 people when they set off. Since when did it become 7? And since when did the 7 subtract 1 from the 7? And it was still 7? It was hard to understand what had happened. The sudden change caused him to stiffen in place. When he lowered his head and observed the display on the arm of the spacesuit, he once again felt an impact that was not inferior to just now. Depth 0, they still existed in the present realm and had not been swallowed by hell. However, everything had unknowingly changed beyond recognition. What's wrong, Huaisher? Izzy noticed his abnormality and seemed confused, asking in the public channel, "Are you okay?" "No, I'm fine, just taking a breather." Huaisher answered calmly, holding the jet. Through the gloves of the spacesuit, he counted the number of safety ropes with the echo of his fingers. 1, 3, 3, 2, 4, 5, 5, 7. It was 7 people. There was no mistake. Try counting again. Tanguy's voice sounded, with a faint smile. 0, 1, 2, 10, 11, 21. Huaisher's heart suddenly became more and more horrified. It was still 21 people. Wait, the counting in his heart paused for a moment, repeatedly comparing the records in the Book of Destiny, and realized what was wrong. Why was the result different every time he counted? Because reality has already been changed. Huaisher. Tanguy sighed in his ear. To be exact, it has mutated under the radiation of Helios' secret instrument. It has become something you can't understand. In the dead silence, Huaisher was sweating profusely. Everything in front of them was so normal. They were still slowly approaching Helios, about to reach the kingdom gate that was several kilometers high. But something had already changed, and they hadn't even noticed it. This is the philosopher's imagination, Tanguy said. Speaking of which, this really is a rare material. If we collected it and sold it to the present realm, each gram would probably be worth as much as a third transformation origin crystal, right? Usually, only a soul that was filled with the essence of skill and wild imagination would produce such a deposit when it was burned. Who would have thought that it would be as vast as the sea here? With such an exaggerated scale, if word gets back, it will definitely attract a lot of gold diggers, right? Wait, you mean burn? That's right, burning origin substances. Tanguy replied seriously. In other words, you can think of those invisible things as the ashes of the dead on Helios. Only when so many outstanding alchemists and their obsessions are burning can it produce such an exaggerated scale, right? The souls of those people were annihilated in the sudden upheaval, and the source substance was extracted and burned by Helios' engine. What remained were ashes that were filled with their own understanding and twisted fantasies, radiating in all directions. In the boundless space, they were looking for a release. Wasn't that unlucky guy who spontaneously combusted just now the same? Being affected and disturbed by them, immersed in their understanding, and unknowingly walked down the path of despair. The more obsessed you are with alchemy, the more you will be attracted by this kind of temptation, like a moth flying into a flame. In the end, you were all burned to ashes in vain. In the end, you didn't understand that what you had comprehended was nothing more than a bubble. That was just the imagination of the deceased's origin substances. It seemed to be a lie filled with philosophy. It was like the principles and essence of a dream. It seemed incomparably precious, and you would do everything you could to remember it. But when you open your eyes, you would only discover that what you had discovered was something as absurd as the banana is as big as the banana peel. In fact, as long as you were even slightly contaminated by it, your cognition would become obstructed. It was because of this that philosopher's imagination was the main material used to strictly investigate all kinds of forbidden drugs. Its biggest use was to brainwash. It made people believe in something absurd. That includes what you just comprehended. Forget it as soon as possible, Tanguy reminded him. That was just a temporary obsession. It has no value at all. After a long period of silence, Huaisher asked dryly, "So, I was just influenced by them? In fact, nothing happened at all?" "No. Actually, there were a lot of things that you didn't notice that had happened a long time ago." "Huaisher, it's just that some of them are worth paying attention to, while others aren't." Tanguy laughed meaningfully. "What if I told you that compared to when we first set out, there aren't just one person missing, but 2 people missing? Do you still remember who was the one who yelled, 'Don't look,' in the beginning?" Huaisher fell into a daze. He couldn't even tell if she was joking or telling the truth. This is the true essence of alchemy, Huaisher. Through origin substances, through secret methods, and through calcining disasters and miracles, you can completely distort reality. Tanguy said mockingly, "Everything has to be given up. If you want to extract miracles, then you will have to create an equivalent amount of disasters. But whether it succeeds or fails, it will still destroy common sense. When Helios's engines begin to distort, this destruction will begin to spread and spread. Right now, you're only experiencing the effects on your perception. Perhaps later on, even mathematics itself will become a ternary system. Perhaps people will even grow 3 eyes and 4 hands, or even become barrel-shaped, or even become lost in non-Euclidean space. It's exactly because of this that we can create a genuine hell without changing the depth. At that moment, Huaishir was standing next to the jet, staring at the heavy door that was as large as a plaza. They had already landed on a large platform that was so empty that it made one's heart flutter. Right at the end of Helios was the only path in front of them. This was the real Hell's Gate. Huaishir had already given up on counting the number of his teammates. That was meaningless. Through Tongi's words, he had already understood one thing. That was, there was no such thing as trust in others here. Except for himself. No one could judge whether the state and mental state of others were normal or whether they were still his companions. Perhaps even he himself would unknowingly become an unexpected person. Everyone had to fight alone, even if they were a so-called team and were close to each other. Do you understand? Why, sure, here, anything can be changed and anything can betray you. Tongi reminded him seriously. After a pause, she suddenly changed the topic and became cheerful. But on the bright side, you can always trust me. As she said that, she whistled with joy. This is a great opportunity to spend time alone with your big sister, increase your bond, and unlock new benefits on the ship. You have to know how to cherish it. It's over. Huaishir was not moved at all when he heard that. He only felt that his heart was getting colder and colder. The world was so cold. Only the puppy in his arms had some warmth, but the puppy looked disdainful and looked down on him. Imagine, when you were in a nightmare-level dungeon, the team leader did not do anything, the teammates were unreliable, and even smoked and slacked off. Who knew how many of them could still breathe? The worst thing was that they had to succeed in one exploration, and there was no chance to revive and start over. The only companion he could rely on was a bad woman with no conscience. It was still a lousy dog that wanted to eat and bite everything. He could almost see the crematorium waving at him enthusiastically. Huaishir's tears almost rushed out. If he had known that there was no good in heaven, he would not have come. In this frighteningly empty square, at the front of the team, Garland Dion's disciple, the alchemist from the Stone Cauldron Society, had already taken out a brass oil lamp from the satchel beside him. He raised his sleeve and rubbed the kettle of the oil lamp twice. Then, in the vacuum, a bean-sized flame ignited out of thin air. Like a phantom, it scanned the surroundings and released strands of wandering light. In the end, the projection from the Leviathan's sun appeared. It was dim and flickering. It was like a video call when the signal was not very good. The old man with the cane raised his eyes and appeared in front of them. He looked around, using the light emitted by the border relics to explore everything around him. As expected, the Kingdom Gate is the furthest away from the central engine. The situation here is normal. His voice paused for a moment, and the blurry projection suddenly turned around and looked at them. His sharp eyes swept across them, as if he was trying to distinguish something that did not belong to the team. In the crowd, Rachel's expression stiffened and became more and more uneasy. "Grandmaster, what's wrong?" "No, it's nothing, Rachel." Garland Dion slowly retracted his gaze and only said, "You can continue forward. There should be a safe area behind the gate. You can rest for a while." So, the disciple leading the team nodded and controlled the jet. He took out his beacon from his pocket and slowly floated towards the closed gate. Like a special effect in a low-quality fantasy TV series, it disappeared in the rippling water. Soon, a signal came from the other end of the safety rope that all was safe. Everyone held onto the same safety rope and slowly moved forward. They brushed past Garland Dion's phantom. 1, 2, 3, until the end of the team. A member who had no sense of presence suddenly stiffened when he passed by, and his footsteps became staggered. He fell to the ground silently. It was as if he had collapsed. The helmet that was riddled with holes fell off from the spacesuit that had long been broken. The withered bones shattered from the cold vacuum, and only the broken skull was still rolling stubbornly. Continuing the obsession from a long time ago, he longed to step into the territory of Helios. Finally, He stopped in front of the gate. The last dim flame extinguished from his eye sockets. He was dead, because he had seen too much. And in the space behind the gate, Huaisher raised his head and stared at the bloody and tragic scene, and the scarlet everywhere. Huaisher widened his eyes. He took a long breath of the oxygen in the spacesuit that was neither cold nor hot. Then, he began to doubt from the bottom of his heart. Was there something wrong with Garland Dion's brain because of his age? What kind of F** king safe zone was this? Chapter 845. It was as if he was looking at the scene of the infernal church's sacrifice. It was too horrible to look at. In the huge space behind the door, everything in sight, the walls, the ceiling, and the floor, were distorted marks painted with blood. It was like a mural painted when one was mad, or something written with the last glimmer of hope and despair. But it was difficult to tell what was written. All the words had been distorted. Only the hallucinatory laughter lingered around, making one's hair stand on end. Huaisher held the hateful water tightly and looked around. Even though the detection equipment had found the existence of air outside, he still dared not to remove the heavy defense. Was all this an illusion or something else? He couldn't tell. But Garland Dion was right. As the furthest location from the central engine, the outflow layer, the Kingdom's Gate was the safest place. Everyone knew that, including the alchemists on Helios. Therefore, they chose to flee. They fled to the place furthest away from the nightmare. Unfortunately, the edge of the nightmare was still just a nightmare. The ground was a mess, as if a dozen beggars had lived here for a long time. Old clothes, garbage, and even excrement were everywhere. There were also corpses. The corpses of the dead. Huaisher could only take a quick glance and stop looking. It was too strange. Some had already become skeletons. Some were still vivid and lifelike, perfectly retaining every bit of their appearance before death, and there were even some that were a combination of both. Some had become seabeds of plants, and some were completely petrified. The only similarity was that on those distorted faces, the corners of their mouths curled up into a smile from the heart. It was as if he could empathize with them and understand their happiness. But their eyes were scarlet and had long dried up. There were still traces of blood tears, and the pain had already turned into a substance overflowing. The joy in the world was no longer there. Long before death, the indescribable sorrow and joy had torn the souls of these survivors. Without exception, they died of madness. Huaisher held the hateful water and picked up the precious materials and border relics on the ground. He looked through them one by one, looking for the remaining clues. When he looked around, he was puzzled from the bottom of his heart. Why did they take things so hard? He scratched his head through the helmet. Could it be that someone on Helios organized a group viewing of Beast Girl Zoo? And it's even 2 seasons in a row, the kind where you can't sleep until you've finished watching it? Wasn't this a little too cruel? Unfortunately, no one seemed to understand the joke used to liven up the atmosphere. In the stiff atmosphere, everyone's expression was cold, full of vigilance and caution. They took out all kinds of defensive tools and relics and carefully checked the situation around them. As for those alchemists from the Stone Cauldron Society, they were like mindless machines. They didn't waver in the slightest as they watched this scene. After the initial investigation, he quickly took off the standard flamethrower from his back, skillfully filled it with blocks of rongsu, and pulled the trigger at the wreckage all over the ground. Then, green tongues of flame spurted out like living creatures. They followed the will of the user and slowly swam, burning everything in their path to ashes, decomposing into the final dust. Rachel's reaction was slow, and he was almost caught in the flames. He quickly threw away the border relic that he had just picked up and hid to the side. However, he did not dare to say anything and only cursed vaguely. Soon, half of the trash and wreckage in the hall had been burned to ashes. At this moment, the Russian alchemist Valery, who had reached the edge of the hall with his bronze staff, suddenly exclaimed and attracted everyone's attention. "Survivors!" Valery shouted in the public channel. "There are still survivors." Everyone paused for a moment and looked at the pile of boxes at the same time. Valery raised the bronze staff in his hand and lightly knocked on the floor. Suddenly, The pile of boxes in the distance made a dull sound. Huaisher sharply sensed the process. Just like his own Supreme, it relied on the material to transmit the impact force. The power of a battering ram was imbued into a small strike and transmitted into the distance, completely destroying the layer of sticky disguise. Then, everyone saw the hunched back of the figure. A skinny man with a bare upper body was sitting in a pool of blood. His hair had been violently pulled out, and only a few strands of hair were still stuck on his swollen scalp. His body was covered in filth and stench, and it had been a long time since he last bathed. On his body, under his feet, and even around him, there were layers of horrifying secret apparatus smeared with fresh blood. At this moment, he numbly tore off the blood scabs on his body. His fingers dipped in the dried blood, and over again, he repaired the faded and peeling marks on his body. He muttered to himself. He did not notice the existence of the group of intruders around him at all. He only muttered to himself and sealed himself in the secret apparatus. But what was more eye-catching was that he was almost completely covered in equipment. Necklaces, jewels, earrings, and a string of blood-stained amulets on his belt. There were even all kinds of accessories that were carelessly wrapped around his body with tape. Huaisher was almost blinded by the waves of origin substances. He resisted the urge to take a deep breath. He suddenly wanted to King kill him. Those were all border relics. That guy's entire body was covered in at least 100 border relics, and they weren't cheap goods produced in some workshop assembly line. Rather, they were high-quality goods that had been painstakingly crafted by real alchemists. Among them, there was no lack of treasures that were ranked in the top 100 of the relic catalog. With just a quick glance, Huaisher recognized quite a few priceless treasures. Protective seal, fire charcoal crystal, Gaia knot, blood oath green eye. These were precious relics that should have been kept close to his body or displayed in a tightly guarded display window. But now, they were densely packed together and hung on a madman's body. Were all the people in Helios this rich? But it was obvious that there were many different styles and factions among them, and they were from completely different eras. Even the degree of usage was different. The one-time use Gaia not have been infused with the blood of alchemists. It was limited to the creator, and it would only take effect within a month. It reflected curses and protected souls. It was impossible for them to be of the same origin. When he thought about the messy state of the corpses around him, it wasn't hard to see where these things came from. After a bitter struggle, the last survivor had survived. But I'm afraid it didn't make any sense. Just as the other explorers were looking around vigilantly, the spiritual pendulum used for detection vibrated wildly and glowed, pointing to the location of the back figure. And he was still immersed in his fanatical writing. His other hand was hugging something tightly, hiding it in his arms like a swaddling cloth. His mouth was focused and numb as he chanted something. The words were too vague, and Huaisher had never learned it. He could only tell that it was Sanskrit by the scribbled Tianqing language on the ground, but he knew nothing else about the content. He could only make out a few nouns. Indra, Yama, Varuna, Surya. Those were the gods inherited from the Indian genealogy, calling on the power of the gods of the past to protect them. But no mystery could be detected at all. At best, they were just chanting scriptures. They were praying devoutly to the gods and Buddhas all over the sky, who could reach out to the survivors in the desperate situation, who could save him from the sea of suffering. But he didn't respond to the rescuers behind him. Garland Dion's disciple polished the oil lamp again, but this time, for some reason, the light from it was quickly extinguished. It was as if there was no signal after leaving the base station. There was no way to get advice. For a moment, everyone fell into a strange silence. It's hopeless. Izzy shrugged and shook his head. He took off his helmet without a care and shook off the ashes. Someone, please give him a quick death. As he said that, he looked at Huaisher, and Huaisher was looking up and admiring the ceiling of Helios above his head. Well, it was indeed different from the ceilings in other places. It was plain and unremarkable, but there was a kind of grace and mystery that was different from other places. At first glance, it was no different from an ordinary ceiling. Was this the so-called concealment of a divine object? Anyway, he just stared blankly. Although he didn't play many horror games, he knew a lot about clouds. He was too familiar with this scene. In an inexplicable and strange scene, there was an inexplicable person doing something with her back to you. If she wasn't crying, she was laughing. It was as if she was looking at something very interesting that attracted you to come over. Kongy Kong. What was this? This was a plot kill. This was a lightning strike in the opening scene. Anyway, he was definitely not going to jump into this pit. Whoever wanted to go, he could go. It was fine if he spilled his blood for the present realm, but why would he risk his life for the Stoneforge Academy? Seeing that Huaishir wasn't moved and didn't even move, the others looked at each other. One of Garland Dion's disciples seemed to say something, and one of them stepped forward and carefully wiped away the secret instrument on the ground. He raised his hand and waved it in front of the praying person, but there was no reaction. The spirit pendulum and various detection devices didn't detect any abnormalities. Finally, the leader looked at Rachel and said something in the private channel. Rachel's expression suddenly became reluctant. He carefully went up, turned the person's eyelids, and checked the vital parts. He came to the same conclusion as Izzy. The source was exhausted, the soul was broken, and there was no hope. But at least he could use some of his remaining strength. Tell them what happened here. Soon, he raised the syringe gun and injected the purple-blue medicine into the praying person's neck, causing an unexpected reaction. The praying person's movements came to an abrupt stop. His eyes violently rolled back, and his body twitched violently. Rachel was so scared that he fell back and retreated on all fours. It was only now that everyone realized that the survivor was holding tightly in his arms was actually a clock. That's right, after some unknown bumps and bumps, the brass clock that had long been covered in dents was now stained with layers of blood, but it was still running. It made a crisp sound. Tick-tock, 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 a hoarse moan sounded. When the survivor woke up from his nightmare, his first reaction when he saw the explorers was not surprise, but panic as he looked at the clock. Watching the clock's hour hand move towards the final tick, with only a few minutes left, he let out a sharp cry and lay on the ground, muttering the names of the gods, trying to repair the secret instrument on the ground. But it was too late, because the dried blood stains had already been wiped away. In his panic, he got up crazily and rushed to the door on all fours. He didn't care about the extremely cold vacuum outside. 1 step, 2 steps, then he fell to the ground, wriggled, and exhausted the last of his source. He died just like that. Huaishir didn't even have time to go up 3 times in a row. He was gone. In the dead silence, everyone looked at each other. Only the sound of the clock was so clear. It gradually became louder and louder like a loud roar. It resounded in everyone's ears. It was at that moment, in this dead and empty space, in the ruins of the Helios workshop, it ushered in a meaningless time boundary. Midnight came. At that moment, the light from all directions instantly disappeared without a trace, replaced by an indescribable darkness that swallowed everything. Screams rose one after another. Damn, which bastard turned off the lights? Huaishir froze in place, feeling a mud-like chill emerge from his heart and spread quickly, bringing with it uncontrollable panic and sadness for no reason. Even a friendly puppy in his arms let out a whimper. Despair spread together with the darkness, swallowing all sounds. Soon, in the public channel filled with the sound of electricity, only Rachel's choking voice was left. In the darkness, the pharmacist knelt on the ground, crying bitterly, hammering the floor powerlessly, and asked in a sorrowful voice, "So, love will disappear, right?" Chapter 846. It was as if the entire world had changed after midnight. Laughter disappeared without a trace and was replaced by endless despair and suffering. Even breathing was filled with pain, regret, and self-blame. Countless unsightly past events surfaced in one's mind and became nightmares that lingered in one's mind in the middle of the night, haunting one's heart. It was as if one had accidentally remembered the mistakes they had made before falling asleep. Then, one had to be prepared to bid farewell to sleep. In the midst of self-blame and regret, one would constantly struggle with the mistakes one had made due to stupidity. In the end, one would be exhausted, close one's eyes in tears, and regret and apologize endlessly in the silence. I'm sorry for being born as a human. But in truth, Huaisha was feeling great. He would never apologize. Not only did he not want to apologize, he even felt a little shameful sense of accomplishment. Even if his mood was unavoidably terrible, he could feel power gushing out from his limbs and bones. The negative energy engine had been strengthened like never before. Even the excitement of the soul had led to the eruption of divinity, causing the ultimate digestion of the eternal beast's flesh to temporarily increase by 6%. Helios was really a good place. Good mountains, good water, even the air was nourishing for a moment. He even wanted to set up a tent here and not leave. But that could not offset the sense of danger that kept rising in his mind, and everything that Supreme could sense. It was like the echo of bats. He could sense the movements from all directions from the countless tiny vibrations on the floor. Thousands of distorted footsteps crawled in the darkness. When he closed his eyes, he could sense countless strange tremors from the faint echo of the hate water. An invisible behemoth was moving in the darkness. When Huaisha took a risk and took off a glove, his 5 fingers could sense the strange torrent that was silently surging in the darkness from the echo of the wind. It was sticky, wriggling, and restless everywhere. It was just a passive perception, but it was as if he could feel the discomfort of his body sinking into the mud bit by bit. The gift of the dark windbreaker brought the best protection. Even without divinity, the Great Si Ming was still the Great Si Ming. It perfectly protected his existence in the darkness. After retracting all of his presence, he almost disappeared into nothingness. It blended into the darkness like an inconspicuous piece of iron and stone. It did not attract the attention of that damn thing. However, someone had made the worst choice. Light the lamp. In the distance, on the spacesuit, the originally turned-off headlights were turned on by the panicked explorer. Then, it lit up the countless colors floating in the air. It was like ink swimming in water, inextricably linked and everywhere. The moment the light appeared, it seemed to have sensed something and instantly shrunk towards the place where the light was. As a result, the invisible space seemed to have substance as well. Thousands of strands of darkness entangled the terrified explorer like a frenzied palm, shrinking inch by inch and clenching. Only the sound of cracking could be heard. The defensive border relic was instantly shattered. A painful shriek rang out, piercing everyone's eardrums. "Go away! Go away!" Alchemist roared hoarsely and waved his hands. Ignoring the spacesuit on his body, he forcibly activated the arcanum engraved on his arms and body, burning the cumbersome spacesuit. Immediately, a large amount of grease-like flames emerged from his burnt body, spreading wildly in all directions. However, the flames that could instantly incinerate steel could not disperse the darkness. Instead, it mixed with the dancing viscous substance, plating it with an eerie color. Just like that, it shrunk instantly, and only a final cracking sound could be heard. The grease-like flames leaked out of the chewing darkness, spreading and illuminating the dull silhouettes that were immersed in sorrow nearby. Exposed crack! In that instant, the dancing darkness seemed to come alive, twitching spasmodically and hissing as if steel was rubbing against each other. Thousands of scarlet eyes appeared within, opening and looking at all directions. Like a rag that rose into the air, it shrouded over their heads and slowly shrunk, squeezing out a rainstorm of blood that converged and formed a river on the ground. The river of blood surged and followed a preset sequence, devouring all the corpses on the ground, melting everything unrelated and turning them into a viscous paste that raged and surged. Even the relics of the border were dissolved in it. Now, both darkness and blood were converging towards a predetermined mark. On the ground, in the corpse of a last survivor, it drilled into the mouth and nose, occupying all space, causing the heart that had lost its vitality to beat again, growing abnormally. It caused the face that was distorted in fear to come alive again. In that instant, he knew it opened its eyes. As tears of blood flowed, the corners of its mouth slowly curled into a smile that was full of happiness. The last step of the alchemy's secret ritual had begun. "This is impossible." The alchemist beside him fell into a daze, unable to accept the bizarre change. Or rather, he finally understood what was going on. Those who ran here, those alchemists who hid near the kingdom's gate, were not survivors or fish that escaped the net at all. They were guards who were deliberately thrown here. Like vicious dogs that were chained in front of the door, they unwittingly became puppets of the mastermind behind the scenes. It was a trap. From the beginning, those people could not escape the control of the nightmare. The so-called lingering at death's door was nothing more than a part of a cruel plan. Someone let them live here on purpose, suffering torment, lingering at death's door amidst hallucinations and pain, falling into this living hell day after day. Like seeds planted in fertile soil, they took root and sprouted, bearing ugly fruits. They were turned into alchemy subjects. Through the environment after Helios went out of control, the survivors were tormented, like force-feeding them with pain, joy, despair, and happiness. In the end, this hellish space was turned into a furnace, igniting an invisible flame and intensifying the source substances that had split along with the spirit, creating seeds of disaster from the souls of the people. Even the relics of the border here were turned into supplies for the seeds. In the instant that a sea of miracles turned into disaster, the soul of the last person would be destroyed, and a brand new monster would break out of its shell. It was a large group of man-made hell, a freak that was comparable to the wearers, even though there was only one person. It was a famous forbidden ritual in alchemy. Spirit of aberration rebirth. This is troublesome. Izzy put out her cigar and sighed in amazement. Only the novice alchemist Huaisher was puzzled. He didn't understand what was going on at all. He only knew that the scene suddenly cut to the boss appearance animation, and he was dumbfounded. He just wanted to run away. The spirit of aberration rebirth is born by relying on the curse of the dead, and its nature is ever-changing. It can be said that there are absolutely no similarities, and unless it's completely destroyed, it can't be killed. Izzy lowered her voice and explained, "But what's more troublesome is that this should be a technique unique to the great master, Hubris." This was what all the alchemists couldn't accept, because Publius had died long before they had left the moon, and before he died, he was imprisoned by the president of the Astronomy Association for 70 years. So, what was it that appeared here at this moment? "Run, why sure." Izzy took a step back. "It'll be troublesome if you get entangled by that thing." Screams followed. It was Rachel, accompanied by the sound of a corpse bursting. The spirit of aberration broke out of its shell, and the indefinite viscous darkness covered that thing like flesh and blood, constantly dripping. Like a centipede that had expanded thousands of times, it stretched out dozens of incomparably slender limbs and quickly crawled out, rushing straight towards. "Roger, give it back to me." A human face seemed to emerge from the squirming darkness, and its scarlet eyes stared at Rachel, not letting go. Rachel ran wildly in panic, taking out some unknown potion from his pocket and injecting into his body at an incredible speed. Then he clenched his teeth and took out something like a dagger from his backpack. Praise the name of Asclepius. Although it hurt, he couldn't care less. He chanted the activation spell and threw the dagger without looking back. The dagger, carved with 2 snakes, flew in the air and stabbed straight at the spirit of aberration behind him. Like a red-hot iron nail, it quickly stretched and pierced into its waist, nailing it to the ground. The curse from the Greek god of medicine caused the huge monster to become stiff, and a gray stone color appeared on its body. It couldn't kill it, but it made it more violent. It struggled with all its might, causing cracks to appear on its petrified body. Before Rachel could breathe a sigh of relief, he saw its mouth open, and a waterfall of viscous mud gushed out, swallowing him. It surged and pulled, not allowing him to escape. "Help! Help!" In the mud, He struggled wildly, calling for help, but no one paid him any attention. Including the alchemists of the Stone Cauldron Society, they all retreated. Such indifference made him collapse, and he screamed, "You can't do this. The great Grandmaster still needs me. I won't tell anyone. You can't do this. You're ungrateful." But the 5 alchemists of the Stone Cauldron Society were still unmoved. They only protected the most important jet and quickly retreated. "Rachel, the great Grandmaster's contract with you has been completed," the leader told him. "You brought about your own death because of your own greed. He doesn't owe you anything." Rachel's expression suddenly changed, and he roared with resentment. "You want to silence me. You're delusional. I have a backup of those things. I have." But no matter how he roared, the alchemists had already indifferently disappeared into the darkness. In despair, he could only look at Huaishur with pleading eyes. Huaishur could only shrug helplessly. He held the boundary marker in his hand. "Brother, I've already made a hearthstone here. You're on your own." As soon as he realized that something was wrong, Huaishur immediately hid in a corner and prepared to return to the city. His movements were fast, and his reaction was fast. Now, with the flickering of the boundary marker, a light had already risen and covered him. The next second, he appeared on the bridge of the Leviathan's sun. It should have been like this, but if all the changes in the world were as expected, there would be no accidents to speak of. The moment the light dissipated, Huaishur only heard a crisp sound from his hand. He wasn't teleported away with a bayou sound. He was still in the same place. Huaishur lowered his head in shock, and his eyes widened. His boundary marker had actually shattered. Chapter 847. Huaishur was dumbfounded. You can even shatter a boundary marker? Could it be that the signal here isn't good and there's no base station to connect to? No way. You're telling me you're disconnected after you've finished making your hearthstone? But that shouldn't be the case. As a precious relic, a boundary marker should be safe. Even if it was ineffective, it shouldn't have shattered. Otherwise, the chaotic secret mechanism would lead to unpredictable consequences. But where were the unpredictable consequences now? Even if there weren't any unpredictable consequences, there should still be an origin substance leak. After a fixed miracle lost its restraints, there would be 19 common dispersal phenomena. Huaishur didn't see any of them. It was as if, after the teleportation pigeons left, the things inside flapped their wings and flew away. Either that, or it could only mean one thing. From the very beginning, this thing was broken. In an instant, Huaishur understood. Garland, that old bastard, didn't plan on letting him go back from the very beginning. But why? What was he after? What good would it do him if he died? Since he didn't welcome him, why didn't he? When he thought of this, Huaishur's train of thought suddenly stopped. A vague guess appeared in his mind. Could it be that the meteor shower and the ambush had been Garland's doing from the very beginning? If he could sense the location of his beacon from so far away and try to rescue him, why couldn't he use this opportunity to launch a meteor shower attack? Besides, even he hadn't been able to rescue him. It only took an instant for trust to collapse, and this thing had never existed in the first place. And now, as he watched Huaishur's boundary marker shatter, the trapped Rachel actually revealed a mocking smile, taking pleasure in Huaishur's misfortune. He didn't even care about his own situation. Or perhaps he had already expected this kind of situation. A high-pitched screech sounded out once again. "Give it back. To me." The wriggling freak roared, and the spike formed by the divine doctor's curse suddenly broke apart. The descending spirit broke free and pounced at Rachel. Rachel's leg was still entangled in pitch-black mud, and he couldn't break free. At this critical juncture, he finally made up his mind. Suddenly, he grabbed something from a medicine box and threw it out. "I'm returning it to you." It was an eye-shaped bronze amulet. While he was inspecting the survivors, he quietly took off the border relic, Blood Oath Green Eye. It required 3 ascendants to swear an oath, offering up half of their soul and origin substance to protect the wearer's safety. Once the blood oath was completed, the ascendants would not have much time left. Finally, the azure eye would open only when all of the souls and origin substances had merged into it. The wearer would obtain the lifespan and origin substance of the victim. Whether it was extending one's lifespan, improving one's soul, or curing curses and corruption in one's soul, it was not difficult at all. What was precious was not the forging method, but the three ascenders who were willing to offer everything they had. It was precisely because of this that Rachel could not help but act in advance and steal it. In any case, there was no hope for him. Rather than waiting for him to die before splitting the spoils, he might as well grab the spoils first. The alchemists of the Stoneforge Institute saw everything but did not point it out. When he was in deep trouble, they did not lend a helping hand. This was all a result of his own actions. Now, the moment he gave up on the blood oath green eye, the berserk descending spirit pounced towards the treasure in the air. The amulet drew a subtle arc in the air before flying straight towards Huaishir's location, diverting the disaster. Ignoring Huaishir's reaction, the blood oath green eye activated by Rachel was instantly bound to his body. In a hurry, Huaishir did not even have time to curse before he felt a fishy wind rush towards him. The descending spirit's malice had already landed on Huaishir's body. There was no time to angrily curse. Huaishir only had time to raise the hateful water and slash it forward. Immediately afterwards, a hurricane swept out. He instantly entered a state of overdrive, and a huge amount of power was transmitted forward along the hateful water. Supreme, Symphony burst forth. The darkness on the descending spirit's face wriggled and trembled violently. Countless amounts of fishy liquid flew in all directions like a torrential rain. As if it had eaten a bomb alive, the entire head fell apart in an instant, revealing the strange bones after the distortion. But then it quickly regenerated, and Huaishir had already borrowed the force to fly out, like a cannonball, towards the exit of the kingdom's gate behind him. He still had the strength to wave goodbye to the descending spirit. "Are you stupid, stinky little brother? This is my escape route." Bang! His vision suddenly turned black, and he felt that his back had smashed against a stone. The originally illusory door had unknowingly been sealed. When he smashed through that layer of stone, he found that he had fallen into another deathly still hall. Even spatial position had been disrupted, and the descending spirit had once again pounced on him without any hesitation. Vaguely, he could hear Rachel's cold laughter. "You deserve it." The apothecary, who had escaped from a disaster, looked coldly at the crack in the wall and laughed mockingly. He struggled to pull his leg out of the mud and immediately activated his boundary marker. This kind of fake alchemist who had overestimated himself and stepped into the Helios workshop was an abandoned pawn from the very beginning. Now, the warm light finally shone. He was going to leave this damn place. The intact boundary marker miraculously shone. Light and shadow rose, enveloping him and flying towards the sun of Leviathan thousands of miles away. And before that, he seemed to have seen something squatting in front of him. Tilting its head, it was looking at him curiously. That small and exquisite sled dog raised its head, its icy blue eyes glancing at him. The corners of its mouth slowly opened, like a smile, revealing 2 rows of harmless little sharp teeth. Where did this dog come from? Rachel instinctively wanted to kick it out, but then he saw an incredible scene. In the darkness, that cute and well-behaved puppy began to rapidly expand again. Countless scales grew out from under the dog's fur, and the horns on its head were towering. And the big mouth that was spewing out the stench of sulfur had already opened, aimed at his body, and suddenly closed. There was a cracking sound. A tragic scream burst forth from the fading light and shadow. The lower half of his body from the chest down had disappeared into the mouth of Bichimo's puppy, along with all the potions and supplies, and even the relics from the border. With the grinding and chewing of its teeth, everything was sent into its bottomless stomach. And so, Bichimo's deeply inhaled the precipitation of hell in the air, licking its sharp claws. Its barbed tongue rubbed against the metal claws, bursting into sparks. It turned back to look at the darkness behind the crack in the wall. Miserable screams could be heard from there. It wasn't Huaishir. It was the descending spirit. There was a loud noise, and then another. The huge creature flew out and smashed into the ceiling. Its sticky body spread out and wriggled violently, unable to be dug out. And on the ground, Huaishur propped himself up with one hand and lifted his helmet with the other. He threw it aside and wiped the sweat off his face. He breathed in the air that wasn't very fresh. When he raised his head, he glanced sideways at the squirming limbs on the ceiling above his head, as well as the countless eyes that opened and closed in horror. "What's wrong? Heat stroke? You look very surprised." Huaishur scratched his head and asked curiously, "You don't think that I can't even beat you, do you? It can't be, right?" In his hand, the hateful water buzzed and released a wisp of electric light. It made the descending spirit wriggle even faster, full of fear. It still remembered that the moment it rushed in, that human suddenly appeared in front of it. With a wave of the staff, a huge force interrupted its charge. Then, with another wave, it was knocked to the ceiling. The cursed blood all over its body was about to go out of control. Even as a newborn monster, as a natural-born wearer of a large group of hell, it had an innate intuition and a perception of miracles and disasters. Countless compound eyes stared at Huaishur below, peeking at the intense light that flowed out from his body. This prey was different from before. Huaishur smiled and woke up the sleeping stigmata in the relic. His eyes lit up with the blue brilliance of the sea. "Stop pretending. I'm Xiangjuan." At this moment, accompanied by the crackling electric current in Huaishur's hand, there was a boiling sound. From Huaishur's satchel, the water tank was buzzing. A large amount of scarlet surged in it, opened the lid of the water tank, and turned into thousands of wisps, snaking out of it and surrounding Huaishur. It was all blood. His blood. The survival backpack of the wise man had a space of about 2 cubic meters. In addition to the necessary small oxygen equipment and compressed food, the space of more than 1.5 cubic meters was stuffed with a special water tank. It was convenient for Huaishur to take and use at will. At this moment, the fresh blood that had been released all night by his superhuman physique surged again, crazily absorbing the surrounding abyss sediment. It glowed with a strange and beautiful light, illuminating his face. Blood was also a kind of liquid. As long as it was a liquid, it was within the range of control of the stigmata relic, hatred water. Originally, the most suitable liquid was weak water, but that alchemy material was too troublesome to refine. He went out in a hurry and didn't have time to prepare it. But the blood of the sublimator itself was not bad, especially after Huaishur's physique was affected by the beast of eternal life. The vitality of the mountain ghost level was increased to an astonishing level. Reflected in the blood, it was an incorruptible source material conductor, a hotbed of highly toxic and pestilence. Now, just one drop was enough to send tens of thousands of people to the crematorium. At this moment, under the protection of the swimming living water, Huaishur, who had been accumulating power for a long time, raised his eyes, and the electric light burst out from the hatred water. He didn't wait for the descending spirit to react and counterattack. The roar of the Supreme burst out. The dazzling electric light lit up the countless scarlet eyes, and then, accompanied by the scorched smell of electrolysis in the air, the violent while sleeping in the stigmata was awakened. So, tens of thousands of blood flew up with Huaishur, and sharp iron light appeared, colliding with each other in midair, intensifying and forming a vortex of blades. As the hatred water swept across, it plowed through the spirit's body. A high-pitched hiss burst out. The counterattack of the descending spirit was defeated in an instant, and then there was endless black, cursed blood gushing out from the crack on its face. But this time, after the vicious cursed blood fell to the ground, it was unable to return to the body. It had already been infected by Huaishur's living blood. Wisps of it were assimilated, and countless beautiful spots appeared on it. It turned into a source of nutrition. Accompanied by a loud collapse, the huge body of the descending spirit fell from the ceiling. In midair, countless sharp appendages rose up and stabbed at Huaishur. But in front of Huaishur, The torrential attacks were easily defeated by the hate water that casually swept across the area. As Huaishur stepped forward, a large amount of blood gathered on the hatred water, spinning wildly and turning into a roaring chainsaw. The roles were reversed, friend. Now, tell me, he stared at those frightened and twitching eyes and asked softly, who is the prey? Chapter 848. The darkness was boiling. The dark, cursed blood rippled. And for the first time in its life, under the stimulation of such a huge sense of crisis, it felt unprecedented terror. And death was close at hand. In the sound of countless joints rubbing together, the descending spirit's body quickly shrank, transforming from its original wild hunting state to a more agile and crazy state. This was a transformation from the chaos and disorder due to its own desire. It changed to a fixed form, and then transformed into a more profound domain. After searching for the experience and understanding left in the source substances of those alchemists, it was spontaneously changing itself. It was like the super evolution of a battle elf in some game. At this moment, accompanied by a frenzied hiss, the cursed blood was turbulent, frantically extracting the endless disasters on Helios, and the brand-new heart began to fluctuate. A pair of sharp antlers like a deer's head grew out from under the cursed blood. The darkness extended, weaving each other into a bundle, and once again attached to the distorted skeleton, forming a huge half-beast, half-human posture. 16 arms came out from the back, and in front of the chest there was a strange bone face. The descending spirit stood up, bowed its head, and the 3 pairs of eyes on the deer's head moved quickly and finally locked onto the enemy in front of it. Flames rose from its body. It hissed. In an instant, Huaishur retreated, because the originally invisible sound wave was given substance, and wherever it passed, everything was torn apart by the unreasonable tyrannical power. Even his gaze contained an evil poison. Through his gaze, he was constantly injecting the crazy joy and sorrow in his consciousness in a Huaishur. In the blink of an eye, it was completely different from before. Even the type was no longer the same. Was that the stigmata? No, it was just similar. It should be said that it was closer to the essence of hell's disaster than the stigmata. It was close to the source and prototype of a certain disaster, a power that originated from the depths. Thousands of years ago, the oldest alchemist, Solomon, had already discovered this. Based on his own exploration of hell, he hypothesized 4 different main types for different forms of circulation, a total of 8 unstable states of change, and 9 ways of manifestation, drawing up 72 different results, and using that as a basis, he completed his final alchemy. Although no one knew the results, the categories and hypotheses he had created had been used and verified by later generations, gradually filling in the gaps and becoming the ancient Genesis Codex that was still in use today, known as the Hell Sequence. Even now, half of the positions were still vacant, but the authority of this decision was irrefutable. Later on, Mendelssohn, the creator of alchemy, created the periodic table of the elements. Now, the changes in the descending spirit could only mean one thing. From the very beginning, it was the result of alchemy. Even its current growth was within the consideration of its creator. At this moment, when the eyes of its chest bone and Huaishur's eyes made contact, an invisible bridge was formed. It was as if an invisible blade had pierced his soul, causing intense pain. In an instant, Huaishur could not hear anything. His hearing had been taken away. 44th in the Hell Sequence, Shax the Illusionist. However, it was useless. In an instant, supreme perception replaced the existence of hearing. The moment he abandoned his hearing, the countless drops of blood became an extension of Huaishur's perception. The tremors under his feet, the wind in the hall, and even the collision of waves. Everything turned into an auditory hallucination, taking shape in Huaishur's mind once again. There was no dizziness or shaking due to the disorder of the semicircular canals. His body, which had exceeded its limits, was like the most precise machine, perfectly executing Huaishi's will and orders. You step assault, stepping forward. Without any mistakes, he swept past the attacks of the 16 arms. Above the water of hatred, the origin form surged, and the endless hostility burst forth with electric light. The resonance began again, and all the power was integrated into a bundle, shooting out from Huaishi's hands and rushing forward. They were already very close to each other. There was a soft sound. The sharp crack of the water of hatred pierced straight into the descending spirit's head. The fluctuation of the origin form and the power of the physical body overlapped. Like a volcanic eruption, the strand of blood from Huaishi exploded. What it formed was an exaggerated effect, like the bombardment of a rocket launcher. Blood splattered everywhere. A huge gap appeared on the body of the descending spirit, bringing about painful injuries, causing Huaishi's hearing to recover. The water of hatred swept across, and the disturbed blood formed a chainsaw again, violently chopping off the descending spirit's arms. Then it violently pierced into its chest, pulling, causing the cursed blood to spurt out. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with the business recently. I really can't find the end. Huaishi stared at the struggling monster under his feet and comforted it. Why don't we just make do with it? It gritted its teeth. Soon it was over. And so the violent decomposition began. The cursed blood gushed out like a fountain from the body of the descending spirit. The deformed body quickly disintegrated under the spinning chainsaw, causing a hoarse and sharp tragic wail. Boom! Behind the descending spirit, a few broken arms suddenly closed, turning into giant claws and slamming down at Huaishi. But there were too many broken limbs, and it couldn't catch up to his speed at all. It just fell to the ground empty. Under the stimulation of death, it had already fallen into madness. Its broken body spasmed violently, and countless broken limbs and huge body smashed in all directions without any pattern, tearing apart the broken ceiling and the surrounding walls. Cracks appeared on the floor one after another. Under the burning of fear and pain, it went crazy and destroyed everything. But it couldn't stop its body from quickly disintegrating. The limbs that flew out twitched, wanting to return. But then a sneaky big mouth stuck out from the darkness, grabbed it, and ate heartily. As it licked the fat juices from the corners of its mouth, it couldn't help but howl at the sky, urging the chef cutting the steak to hurry up. It was in a hurry to eat. The man and the dog had a clear division of labor. Even if there was no rehearsal, they cooperated with each other skillfully without any flaws or gaps. The dog might not be a real dog, and the man might not be a real man. The living blood that contained a strong poison rolled out, crazily eroding the mutated body, continuously classifying and deriving more of itself. Just like the von Neumann machine, an organism that could never be satisfied, relying on the vitality of the beast of eternal life, endless cell classification, and telomeres rebirth. The viciousness of life and the pain of death hit at the same time. The descending spirit suddenly opened its mouth and once again let out a solid sound wave. But this time, even the sound was shattered by Huaishi's supreme, completely dispersing into a hurricane. Only the roar burst out from under their feet. A crack appeared on the floor and suddenly spread rapidly. The collapse began, and a large number of rocks and steel structures collapsed into the darkness below. The descending spirit fell into the darkness, and its cry was sharp. Ecstasy. But before it could express its joy, it saw a smiling face quickly approaching. That was despair. Despair fell from the sky. In this strange workshop where the space changed after the floor shattered, they fell diagonally into a huge deep well. On both sides of the vertical deep well were doors covered with blood stains, and on one side was a bright red carpet, and on the other side was like a ceiling with a luxurious chandelier inlaid. It was like a slanted corridor, but Huaisher did not care about the strange situation at the moment. Wrapped in the potential energy that fell from the sky, Yu's step stomped, and after breaking the bone surface in front of its chest, the hateful water that was wrapped around the blood-red chainsaw had once again stabbed into its body, spinning wildly. After the broken bone's surface, a ray of brilliance flashed with the last of its strength. This time, what was taken away was its sight and touch. But this could not hinder the performance of Supreme at all. That would only make it more miserable. Even without Supreme, Huaisher also had the understanding of the realm of nothingness. As long as there was still one kind of perception, it would not be affected at all. The descending spirit turned its body in pain in the air, trying to throw him out, but the living blood was like the best rope, tightly connecting them together, not allowing them to be separated. It fell from the slanted corridor, smashed through the wall, tore the ceiling, and fell into the narrow bedroom. But the bedroom was still torn apart. The heavy body that was like mud moved with difficulty. Its limbs were chopped, and after smashing through the wall, it broke into a new space. In the darkness, there were continuous tragic screams. It broke through layers of walls and fell deeper into the abyss for an unknown amount of time. In the end, along the pipe that was huge enough for a giant to slide in, it fell into a mountain of construction waste. It twitched and twitched again. In the end, with the stirring of the living blood chainsaw, there was no more sound. Only a mournful cry was left, and it gradually dissipated. It was gone, and Huaisher raised his hand, wiped away the black cursed blood on his smile, and laughed to the sky. It felt good. When he looked down at the corpse under his feet, he was full of a sense of accomplishment. What? I'm still quite strong. Reality proved that even with the destruction element, a small organization of derivatives, and the useless ultimate in my hands, I, Huaisher, am still invincible in the world. Wow, it looks really tragic. Tongi's phantom appeared on his shoulder, and she said in a mocking tone, "Young people need to know how to regulate themselves. Don't suffocate your body. You can even drive on this lousy road?" Huaisher was shocked. She turned around and asked, "Why did you come out again? Isn't that why I have to show my presence and share some tips from time to time?" Tongi said with a smile, "This is Helios after all. Don't be reckless when you're determined. Don't worry, didn't I win?" Huaisher waved his hand casually. "Noob. So, the point is not to lose or win, but to not be reckless." Tongi sighed. "Don't you pay attention to your surroundings?" Huaisher was puzzled. He looked around and saw countless building debris and debris. Only then did he realize that his friendly puppy had not followed him. It was still standing on the crack above, looking down. It widened its eyes and flicked its tongue at him, signaling with its eyes. It seemed to be hinting at something, but it was a dog after all, and it could not say anything. Fortunately, the surrounding environment made up for this. When Huaisher raised his head, he saw a shockingly huge space. Countless collapsed buildings and ruins, like a huge garbage disposal plant, and something that would definitely appear in the garbage dump. Following his gaze, in the darkness, pairs of scarlet eyes opened one after another, and foul-smelling mucus dripped down. The darkness was wriggling, awakened by the aura of the cursed blood in the air. Then, one after another, deformed spirits appeared from the darkness. Dozens, hundreds, forward, it was an overwhelming darkness that filled everything. They opened their eyes silently and cast cold gazes at the takeout that had overestimated itself. Huaisher's smile froze on his face. His fiery heart turned cold in an instant. Chapter 849. Ah, you're all here? As if nothing had happened, Huaisher pulled the hatred water out of the corpse under his feet. He squeezed out a smile with difficulty, took a step back, and then another step back. He cupped his hands and said goodbye in a trembling voice. "Sorry to disturb you. Goodbye." In an instant, the living blood gathered into a bundle, rolled him up, and began to pull him up rapidly. But the power coming from the darkness was faster. Before Huaisher could react, a black shadow flew over. From above, it tore the link of the living blood with a sliding shovel. Then it refracted on the wall. When Huaisher finished blinking, the living blood in his hand had broken, and the bestial vertical pupil was close at hand. A roar burst forth. He flew backward to the ground, and crashed into the ruins of the building. Before he could get up, a thick tentacle suddenly stretched out from the ruins, rolled him up, and threw him into the distance. It was like playing basketball. Huaishir felt the world spin around her as she was enveloped in a spherical shield. She had lost count of how many times she had been knocked into in an instant. Her entire body fell into darkness as she felt the continuous impact. What was worse was that cracks had appeared on the shield of the living blood. He was unable to support it. Huaishir's face suddenly turned green. It took so much effort to deal with one of these spirits. He could at least fight with 2 of them, and he could at least run away with 3 of them. But there were so many of them. If he didn't pay attention today, he would really send himself to death. The giant elephant-like spirit had already raised its head and screamed. It raised its pillar-like leg and trampled down on Huaishir. However, before that could happen, the living blood's protective shield shattered with a loud bang. Huaishir shot out from within like a bolt of lightning, dragging the intense light of hatred behind her. She had already flown up and was level with the giant elephant's malevolent head. Only a shrill electric light flashed across, making the giant elephant feel pain and roar angrily. The whole garbage dump shook under the heavy trampling of the heavy mass. As for Huaishir, he had already borrowed the force to fly up again. He only saw the darkness surging and gathering towards him at an incredible speed. He could not help but grit his teeth and clench his fists. In an instant, the living blood around his body suddenly gathered and condensed into a sparkling and translucent crystal under his feet. The origin substance mixed into the blood, which had been compressed endlessly, began to glow with a blinding red light. After barely activating the forging furnace, the alchemy fire instantly activated the origin substance and life force within it, turning it into a giant bomb. Ignite! In the next moment, a red storm suddenly burst out of thin air and spread in the darkness. Countless fine blood crystals tore the greedy cursed blood apart, forming a fleeting and terrifying flame. More than half of the living blood, including the new blood that had just been multiplied, had been thrown in by Huaishir. The destructive power was beyond Huaishir's imagination. The flying sharp shards almost cut the first few spirits of birth into skeletons, shattering them into several pieces. And Huaishir's figure used the power of the explosion to rise up again, flying back the way he had come. Above the crack in the ceiling, the friendly puppy suddenly stuck its head out, opened its mouth, and seized this fleeting opportunity to bite him, then turned around and ran. The explosion close by caused his internal organs to be impacted, causing him to bleed internally and break his ribs. Huaishir only felt a buzzing sound in his ears, and his vision was blood red. However, he still did not dare to relax. He forcibly activated the power of Ruin's End, once again releasing a strand of origin substance, causing the innate ability of the Black Windbreaker to activate. The dog and man instantly disappeared into the darkness, disappearing from the monster's senses. Behind the crack, the countless spirits of birth immediately became restless, roaring angrily. The flood surged, and they poured out of their nests, frantically searching for that cooked duck. But no matter how carefully they searched, it was difficult to find any traces left behind by the outsider. The high-pitched screeches transmitted a message into the distance. And so, in the depths of Helios, in the broken central reactor, a vague silhouette emerged from the endless light. Then it opened its eyes. Terrifying flames gathered in its eyes, and it looked over. An indescribable pressure descended here. Its gaze penetrated the layers of barriers, coldly sweeping inch by inch, as if it wanted to search heaven and earth, not letting go of a single speck of dust. Suddenly, it pierced through a layer of insignificant darkness. But amidst the sound of bubbles bursting, there was nothing behind the darkness, only a string of wretched blood extending into the distance. However, that gaze was not in a hurry to trace back. Instead, it retracted its gaze, looking inwards and searching inch by inch, identifying every trace left behind by the intruder. It was as if it could see that Huaishir had pretended to leave traces and quietly turned back. It was not willing to let go of any suspicious points. There was nothing unusual. All the spirits of birth respectfully prostrated themselves on the ground, trembling, enduring the pressure of that tyrannical gaze. A mouse-like monster shuddered and instantly attracted cold gazes. It froze in place, then split into two without any warning, revealing its internal structure from the inside out. In the end, the gaze slowly retracted. The spirits of birth still prostrated themselves on the ground, not daring to move. Only after a long time did they return to their lairs with their tails between their legs and fell into a deep sleep. An hour passed, 2 hours passed, 3 hours passed, 5 hours passed. In the ruins of the garbage dump, the monster killed by Huai suddenly moved. Noticing that there was no reaction around, it moved again. From the broken chest, a sneaky little dog head drilled out, quietly glancing around. There seemed to be no problem. It turned around and bit its companion's finger. Thus, from the cooling, cursed blood, a figure slowly slid out. He did not get up at all, nor did he make any sound. Under the cover of the dark trench coat, he relied on his own muscles to move forward like a snake. He quietly left the village and did not want to shoot. Just like that, with the dog on his back, he got into a sewer pipe. He disappeared into the deepest part of the darkness. Only a bat-like spirit of birth hung on the ceiling as if it smelled something. It opened its eyes to take a look, but it did not see anything, so it withdrew its gaze. After running for an unknown distance, the exhausted Huai stopped in her tracks. He finally found a slightly safer gap, stuffed the dog in, and then himself. He turned over and blocked the gap with tools and camouflage. He fell into a deep sleep. The darkness returned to silence, and nothing happened. 5 hours ago, in the lower level of Helios, on the east side of the path of ascension, there was an endless fog that engulfed everything in its path. Only a faint figure could be seen within it, like mourners heading to a funeral. The alchemists from the Stoneware Institution did not take off their pitch-black spacesuits. They just raised their heavy jets and moved forward silently. There was no communication or words between them. They were like robots, coldly and accurately carrying out the orders from the Grandmaster. Holding weapons in their hands, they killed all the creatures that blocked their way along the way, whether it was monsters or survivors. Just like that, they walked forward on the bloody path, step by step, going deep into the core of the lower level, until they were surrounded by layers of frenzied spirits of birth. A sharp, long tongue shot out, cutting the leader's arm, and immediately swept away most of his body and swallowed it into its stomach. But the incomplete alchemist in the stomach still completed his last mission, turning himself and the enemy into a dissolved liquid and poured it in all directions. Wherever it passed, everything collapsed and melted like wax. In the end, all that was left was a sticky substance that kept bubbling. Soon, in the dissolved substance, the reborn leader slowly rose, looking down at his naked body indifferently. With a snap of his fingers, a spacesuit was derived from the solution again, covering his body. Moving forward, at the end of the tunnel, there was the sound of sonorous footsteps. With solemn halos on their heads, knights in heavy armor walked towards them step by step, holding long halberds in their hands. It was as if they were pushing through an iron wall. The man-made alchemy bullets had no effect on them. After breaking through their defenses, they went straight in, and the alchemy arcana tore their armor apart. But there was nothing behind the armor. Only a wriggling darkness suddenly stabbed out, converging into an amorphous sludge monster, and swallowed and covered them one by one. In an instant, more than half of them were lost. Then, the sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other rang out. The heavy jet suddenly shook, and the thick outer shell fell apart, revealing the substance hidden within. But it was not some compressed, simple frontline base. Instead, it was a pitch-black iron coffin. Behind the iron coffin, an unknown thing opened its eyes. In an instant, the steel before its eyes melted, and then the amorphous monster was completely torn apart, evaporating into ashes. The blazing light did not stop, tearing through layers of planks and walls, piercing through the middle layer of Helios. After sweeping past the top layer of Helios, it pierced through the entire 7 days of alchemy and came out from the other side of Helios. It pierced into the demon's eye of Jupiter. Only a streak of terrifying scarlet was left. It was like the blood that gushed out after piercing the eye. Soon, the terrifying light dissipated as the eyes closed, leaving only a terrifying crack on the black coffin that looked like it had melted steel. The crack wriggled like a living creature, quickly closing up and disappearing. The silent alchemists were reborn from the ashes, once again carrying the iron coffin and moving forward. They disappeared into the deepest part of the fog. Damn it, is there anyone? Is there anyone? In the transmission center of the Son of Leviathan, Rachel screamed hoarsely. Half of his body fell to the ground, and blood spurted out. The man twitched in pain and roared hoarsely, but no one responded in the empty transmission room, as if waiting for him to die. So indifferent and ruthless. Rachel's expression became more and more resentful, and with the last of his bizarre thoughts, he clenched his teeth. Literally, he clenched his teeth. The snakeskin dust in his molars flowed into his throat, and then a miracle happened. His broken body began to quickly regenerate and recover. It was just that the reborn body was not compatible with the original parts. He looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child, but with an adult's face and an arm. He had completely become a deformed child. And the viscous amniotic fluid spread on the ground. Rachel gasped and struggled to get up. He casually tore off a piece of cloth and wrapped it around his body. He did not have time to rest and pushed the door open angrily. He rushed straight to the bridge with resentment and anger. The great Grandmaster actually stood by and did not care how much he sacrificed for him. That old thing was not trustworthy at all. It completely violated the contract between them. Full of anger and resentment, Rachel violently pushed the door open and roared at the old man with his back to him. "This is not what we agreed on." In the silence, no one responded. Only the tragic blood reflected on Rachel's gradually pale face. Blood flowed between the countless corpses and flowed to his feet, bringing with it a cold and sticky feeling. Then, the old corpse slowly fell to the ground. Blood as hot as molten iron silently flowed out of the broken neck, corroding the floor with a sizzling sound. Only a dead and furious head was left spinning in the hands of the enemy, sprinkling the last scarlet blood. Now, holding the head of Garland Dion in his hand, the one-eyed alchemist Ragnar. No, the great Grandmaster Pubris raised his eyes and looked at the deformed child who was seeking his own death, showing a warm smile. "What did you agree on? Can you tell me?" You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.